Evidence outlives every empire, yet refuses every verdict. Ancient silence preserves impossible secrets, inviting fearless minds toward unsettling truths. Familiar timelines quietly unravel, while forgotten symbols awaken relentless doubt. Continue carefully. Each discovery dissolves another illusion, leaving only deeper shadows where confidence once stood, waiting for your next breath alone. Perched high above the rugged granite hills of southern Corsica, Casteddu commands a sweeping view of forests, valleys, and the distant Mediterranean. Massive stone walls curve around the summit, their weathered blocks blending almost seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. From a distance, the fortress appears less like something built by human hands and more like an extension of the mountain itself. Even today, silence settles naturally over the ruins, interrupted only by the wind weaving through ancient stones that have watched countless generations pass. Casteddu dates to the Bronze Age, most likely between the 14th and 12th centuries BC, during a period when Corsica was home to the Taurian culture. The settlement occupies a naturally defensible hilltop, strengthened by carefully constructed cyclopean walls built from enormous granite blocks. Some of these stones weigh several tons, fitted together without mortar in a manner that has endured for more than 3,000 years. Within the enclosure, archaeologists have identified traces of circular dwellings, storage areas, and defensive gateways, suggesting that this was not merely a military outpost but a thriving community. Excavations have uncovered pottery, bronze objects, and everyday tools, revealing a society engaged in trade and craftsmanship. The island itself occupied an important position between the western Mediterranean and the Italian peninsula, making contact with neighboring cultures not only possible but likely. Yet, the fortress raises questions that remain difficult to answer with certainty. Why was such an elaborate stronghold constructed on this isolated summit? Was defense truly its primary purpose, or did the elevated position also carry symbolic or ceremonial significance? The panoramic views stretch for many kilometers, allowing anyone standing atop the walls to observe movement across the surrounding landscape long before visitors arrived. Such visibility offered obvious military advantages, but it may also have reflected social status or spiritual beliefs now lost to time. One of the site's most striking features is the remarkable precision of its stonework. The enormous granite blocks were shaped only minimally, yet they interlock with surprising stability. Bronze Age builders possessed neither iron tools nor advanced machinery, making the transportation and placement of these stones an impressive engineering achievement. Mainstream archaeology attributes the construction to skilled local communities working over extended periods, using levers, wooden rollers, earthen ramps, and coordinated labor. Still, alternative interpretations occasionally emerge. Some researchers have compared Casteddu to other megalithic fortifications scattered across the Mediterranean, wondering whether distant cultures exchanged architectural knowledge more extensively than once believed. Others have suggested that the site's commanding location hints at astronomical observations or seasonal rituals connected to the surrounding mountains and the rising sun. No definitive evidence confirms these ideas, yet neither have they disappeared entirely from discussions surrounding the fortress. The eventual decline of Casteddu adds another layer of uncertainty. Archaeological evidence suggests that the settlement was abandoned sometime toward the end of the Bronze Age, a period marked by widespread disruption across much of the Mediterranean world. Climate fluctuations, shifting trade networks, internal conflict, or changing political structures have all been proposed as possible explanations. None fully accounts for why such an imposing stronghold was ultimately left to weather alone. Standing among these silent granite walls today, it becomes easy to imagine generations who watched the same horizon, defended the same gates, and looked toward distant seas whose visitors could bring opportunity or danger. The fortress still dominates the landscape exactly as its builders intended, but their names, beliefs, and ambitions have faded into obscurity. The stones remain, patient and unchanging, inviting every new visitor to consider whether they preserve only the memory of a Bronze Age community or fragments of a story that has yet to be completely uncovered. If Casteddu Daragju reminds us that stone can preserve forgotten ambitions long after their builders have disappeared, then our next destination reveals a different kind of mystery, one hidden not on an isolated mountain, but beneath the fields of southeastern Europe. Here, history seems to emerge layer by layer, each discovery challenging assumptions about who once lived at the crossroads of ancient civilizations. Near the modern village of Krševica in southern Serbia lies the archaeological site known as Kale-Krševica. At first glance, the landscape appears unremarkable. Gentle hills roll across fertile countryside, interrupted only by patches of woodland and scattered farmland. Yet, beneath this quiet setting rests the remains of one of the most unexpected settlements ever uncovered in the Central Balkans. What initially appeared to be an ordinary hill concealed the ruins of a carefully planned community whose existence has forced historians to reconsider the reach of the ancient Greek world. Excavations beginning in the early 21st century revealed an urban settlement dating primarily to the 4th century BC. Stone foundations, paved streets, drainage systems, workshops, and impressive public structures gradually emerged from the soil. Archaeologists uncovered thousands of artifacts, including fine Greek pottery, locally produced ceramics, bronze objects, coins, jewelry, and imported luxury goods. Together, these discoveries painted the picture of a prosperous settlement deeply connected to Mediterranean trade, despite its inland location. One feature immediately attracted particular attention: a sophisticated water management system, including carefully engineered stone channels and reservoirs, suggested an unexpectedly advanced level of planning. Water flowed through constructed passages designed to serve homes, workshops, and public areas. Such infrastructure was uncommon for settlements this far north during that period, prompting scholars to ask whether Kale-Krševica represented something far more significant than an isolated trading post. The prevailing interpretation identifies the settlement as a major urban center influenced by Greek culture, perhaps even founded by Greek colonists or merchants who established a permanent presence among local populations. Others believe it may have been occupied primarily by the Paeonians or other regional communities who adopted Greek architectural styles and commercial practices through sustained contact rather than colonization. The archaeological evidence supports strong interaction, yet the exact identity of the people who built and governed the settlement remains uncertain. Its location only deepens the puzzle. Positioned along natural routes linking the Aegean world with the interior Balkans, Kale-Krševica occupied a strategic crossroads between cultures, economies, and political spheres. Merchants likely carried metals, timber, livestock, ceramics, and luxury goods through these valleys for generations. Such connections would explain the diversity of artifacts discovered at the site. Yet, the scale of construction exceeds what many historians once believed possible in this region during the classical period. Then, there is the question of disappearance. Sometime during the late 4th or early 3rd century BC, the settlement appears to have declined rapidly. Evidence suggests destruction by fire in certain areas, while other portions show signs of gradual abandonment. Was the community caught in expanding regional conflicts? Did shifting trade routes deprive it of prosperity? Did changing political alliances leave it isolated from the networks upon which it depended? Archaeology offers clues, but no single answer capable of explaining every detail. As often happens with remarkable discoveries, more speculative ideas have also entered the conversation. Some independent researchers have proposed that Kale-Krševica represents evidence of a forgotten northern Greek kingdom, whose influence stretched much farther than surviving historical records suggest. Others wonder whether ancient writers omitted important settlements simply because their histories were lost over centuries of copying and translation. A few have even suggested that the site belonged to an unknown civilization that later merged into neighboring cultures, leaving behind architecture but almost no written memory of its existence. These possibilities remain highly speculative, and no archaeological evidence confirms such claims. Yet they reflect an undeniable truth about Kale-Krševica. Every excavation has revealed more complexity than expected. Rather than simplifying the history of the Balkans, the discoveries continue to expand it. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not who built the settlement, but how easily an entire urban center disappeared from human memory. For centuries, generations farmed these hills without realizing that paved streets, carefully engineered waterways, and thriving neighborhoods rested only a short distance beneath their feet. It is a reminder that history is not always erased by catastrophe. Sometimes it simply becomes buried, patiently waiting until curiosity uncovers another forgotten chapter. Standing among the excavated walls today, surrounded by quiet countryside instead of bustling markets, it becomes difficult not to wonder how many other cities still sleep beneath ordinary landscapes, carrying stories that have yet to find their place in the human record. If Kale-Krševica reminds us that entire cities can disappear beneath ordinary landscapes, our journey now leads farther east, where an ancient fortress still overlooks the meeting of rivers as it has for thousands of years. Here, the mystery is not simply what has been buried, but how one place could survive countless empires while preserving secrets that refuse to fit neatly into any single chapter of history. High above the deep valleys where the Krami and Chivchavi rivers converge stands the ruined city of Samshvilde, one of the oldest continuously occupied fortified sites in the South Caucasus. Sheer cliffs surround much of the plateau, creating natural defenses that seem almost impossible to overcome. From the edge of the rocky outcrop, the landscape stretches toward distant mountains, while the rivers below carve silent paths through the earth exactly as they did thousands of years ago. Wind moves through broken churches, shattered walls, and abandoned streets, giving the impression that the city has merely paused, waiting for its inhabitants to return. Unlike many archaeological sites frozen within a single era, Samshvilde contains layer upon layer of human history. Its earliest occupation reaches back into the Bronze Age, while later centuries saw the rise of powerful kingdoms, medieval rulers, merchants, soldiers, and pilgrims. Every civilization that controlled this strategic crossroads left its own imprint without completely erasing those that came before. The result is a landscape where prehistoric foundations, classical fortifications, medieval churches, and defensive towers coexist within the same sprawling ruins. Historical records identify Samshvilde as an important settlement in the ancient kingdom of Iberia, later becoming a significant political and military center during various periods of Georgian history. Because of its commanding position between mountain routes and fertile valleys, the city controlled trade, communication, and military movement across much of the surrounding region. Whoever possessed Samshvilde held more than a fortress. They held a gateway between worlds. Archaeological excavations continue to uncover evidence of this remarkable past. Stone fortification walls, residential buildings, religious structures, workshops, storage facilities, and burial sites reveal a city that evolved continuously over many centuries. Coins from distant lands, imported ceramics, weapons, jewelry, inscriptions, and everyday household objects suggest extensive commercial and cultural connections reaching well beyond the Caucasus. Far from being isolated, Samshvilde participated in a network of exchanges linking Europe, Asia, and the Near East. Yet, despite this wealth of evidence, many aspects of the city's earliest history remain surprisingly elusive. Some of the oldest stone structures beneath the visible medieval ruins are difficult to date with complete confidence. Archaeologists agree that portions belong to the Bronze and Iron Ages, but successive rebuilding campaigns have obscured the original layout. Each generation reused earlier foundations, dismantled older walls, and incorporated ancient masonry into newer construction. The city became a living archive, whose oldest pages were rewritten again and again. One particularly intriguing feature is the remarkable choice of location itself. The plateau is naturally protected by steep cliffs on several sides, requiring defensive walls only where the terrain becomes accessible. Such geography provided obvious military advantages, but it also raises broader questions. Did the first settlers choose this place solely for defense? Or did the dramatic landscape possess symbolic importance long before organized kingdoms emerged? Elevated locations throughout the ancient world frequently served ceremonial as well as strategic purposes, and while no definitive evidence confirms similar practices at Samshvilde, the possibility continues to invite discussion. Religious history adds another dimension to the site's enduring mystery. Throughout its long occupation, Samshvilde witnessed profound cultural transformations. Pagan traditions gradually gave way to Christianity, and churches eventually rose within a landscape once occupied by earlier sanctuaries, whose exact nature remains uncertain. Some scholars have wondered whether sacred locations were deliberately reused across successive belief systems, allowing spiritual continuity to survive beneath changing religious identities. Similar patterns appear elsewhere in the ancient world, though proving such continuity at any single site remains exceptionally difficult. Then there are the stories preserved outside archaeology. Local folklore speaks of hidden tunnels running beneath the fortress, secret passages leading toward the rivers below, and treasures concealed during times of invasion. Legends describe rulers who escaped impossible sieges through underground routes and valuables buried where only a handful of trusted guardians knew the entrance. Despite occasional investigations, no extensive tunnel network matching these tales has been conclusively documented. Still, the stories endure, passed from generation to generation, becoming part of the landscape itself. Other traditions describe unexplained lights appearing among the ruins after sunset, or mysterious echoes drifting across the cliffs when no one is present. Such accounts belong to folklore rather than historical evidence, yet places occupied for thousands of years often accumulate narratives that blur the line between memory and imagination. Whether inspired by natural acoustics, changing light, or centuries of storytelling, these legends continue to shape how visitors experience the ancient city. The repeated destruction and rebirth of Samshvilde may be its greatest enigma. Across more than 2 millennia, the fortress endured invasions, earthquakes, political upheaval, and changing empires. Again and again, damaged structures were repaired or replaced. Again and again, life returned. Yet eventually, despite its extraordinary resilience, the city entered irreversible decline. By the modern era, only scattered ruins remained where thousands had once lived. Why did a place capable of surviving so many crises ultimately fade into silence? Was its abandonment simply the consequence of shifting trade routes and political change? Or had the strategic world that created Samshvilde itself disappeared? The stones offer no direct answers. They stand quietly above the rivers, preserving memories measured not in centuries but in millennia, inviting each visitor to wonder how many untold stories still lie hidden beneath the layers of one of the Caucasus' most enduring ancient strongholds. If Samshvilde reveals how a city can survive countless empires while quietly absorbing the passage of time, Our next destination carries us deeper into Central Asia, where another forgotten settlement once stood at the crossroads of civilizations. Here, the mystery is not only what remains buried beneath the earth, but how a place so significant could almost disappear from history before archaeologists recognized its true importance. Along the northern bank of the Amu Darya River in present-day Uzbekistan lie the windswept ruins of Kampyr Tepa. At first glance, the site appears little more than a collection of weathered earthen mounds rising gently above the surrounding plain. The sun hardens the ancient clay into shades of ochre and gold, while desert winds sweep across walls that have slowly surrendered to more than 2,000 years of erosion. From a distance, the settlement seems almost indistinguishable from the landscape itself, as though the earth has gradually reclaimed what humanity once built with remarkable ambition. Yet, beneath these quiet ridges rests one of the most intriguing archaeological sites connected to the Hellenistic world in Central Asia. Most scholars date the foundation of Kampyr Tepa to the late 4th or early 3rd century BC, shortly after the campaigns of Alexander the Great transformed vast regions stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. Whether the settlement was established directly under Macedonian influence or by the rulers who inherited Alexander's fragmented empire remains a subject of ongoing study. What is clear, however, is that Kampyr Tepa soon became an important fortified city positioned along vital trade and military routes linking Bactria with lands farther east. Excavations have revealed an impressive urban landscape. Defensive walls enclosed residential districts, administrative buildings, workshops, warehouses, and narrow streets carefully organized within the city's boundaries. Archaeologists uncovered Greek-style pottery alongside local ceramics, coins bearing Hellenistic rulers, glass vessels, weapons, sculptures, and inscriptions that reflect a remarkable blending of cultural traditions. Rather than representing one civilization replacing another, Kampyr Tepa illustrates a gradual fusion between Greek influences and long-established Central Asian societies. Perhaps nowhere is this cultural meeting more visible than in the architecture itself. Certain structures display unmistakable Hellenistic planning, while others preserve local building techniques developed long before Alexander's arrival. Mud brick walls rise upon carefully prepared foundations, combining imported ideas with regional experience. The result is not a copy of a Greek city transplanted into Asia, but something entirely its own, a community shaped by continuous exchange between distant worlds. Its location made such interaction almost inevitable. The Amu Darya River served as one of antiquity's great natural corridors, carrying merchants, diplomats, soldiers, and travelers across immense distances. Long before the Silk Road became famous, routes through this region connected civilizations separated by mountains, deserts, and thousands of kilometers. Kampyr Tepa occupied a strategic position within this network, allowing goods, languages, religions, and technologies to converge inside its walls. Yet, despite its importance, the settlement still guards numerous unanswered questions. One enduring mystery concerns its precise identity in ancient historical records. Several scholars have proposed that Kampyr Tepa may correspond to the lost city of Alexandria Oxiana, one of the settlements traditionally attributed to Alexander the Great during his eastern campaigns. Others disagree, suggesting that the evidence remains insufficient and that Alexandria Oxiana may have stood elsewhere entirely. Ancient written sources provide only limited descriptions, and centuries of changing landscapes have complicated attempts to match texts with archaeological remains. The debate continues because no single discovery has settled the matter. If Kampyr Tepa truly represents one of Alexander's foundations, it would hold exceptional significance for understanding how Greek political and cultural institutions spread across Central Asia. If it does not, the city remains equally fascinating as evidence of a regional power that flourished independently while embracing foreign influences. Either interpretation transforms our understanding of this remarkable frontier. The site's eventual decline is equally difficult to reconstruct. Archaeological evidence indicates that Kampyr Tepa experienced several phases of occupation before being abandoned during the early centuries AD. Political instability, shifting trade routes, military conflicts, and changing river systems have all been suggested as contributing factors. Rivers in Central Asia have repeatedly altered their courses throughout history, sometimes leaving prosperous settlements isolated from the very waterways that sustained them. Even a modest environmental shift could have changed the fortunes of an entire city. Still, some researchers believe the story may be more complex. Because relatively little of the settlement has been fully excavated, every new season of archaeological work continues to produce unexpected discoveries. Hidden streets emerge beneath collapsed walls. Previously unknown buildings reshape earlier interpretations. Objects imported from astonishingly distant regions suggest commercial connections even broader than once imagined. Rather than answering existing questions, each excavation often introduces entirely new ones. Outside mainstream scholarship, more speculative theories occasionally appear. Some writers suggest Kampyr Tepa belonged to an extensive network of forgotten Hellenistic cities whose influence reached much farther into Asia than surviving historical texts acknowledge. Others imagine that undocumented expeditions, lost royal archives, or vanished libraries once recorded the city's true importance before disappearing during centuries of warfare and political upheaval. Such ideas remain unsupported by direct evidence, yet they reflect a broader reality. Our knowledge of Central Asia's ancient past remains remarkably incomplete. Standing among the fragile mud-brick walls today, it is easy to forget that these quiet ruins once echoed with merchants bargaining in multiple languages, soldiers arriving from distant kingdoms, craftsmen shaping imported materials, and travelers carrying stories from worlds beyond the horizon. Time has softened nearly every outline, but it has not erased the city's presence. Kampyr Tepa continues to occupy its silent place beside the river, offering fragments rather than complete answers, inviting us to wonder how many chapters of ancient history still lie hidden beneath layers of dust, waiting for the next careful excavation to reveal them. If Kampyr Tepa demonstrates how entire cities can fade into the dust while leaving only fragments of their story behind, our next destination offers a different kind of mystery, one carved directly into solid rock. Here, on a lonely mountain in the Rhodope Range, the landscape itself appears to have been transformed into a sacred monument, raising questions that have echoed for thousands of years. Perched atop a rugged hill in southern Bulgaria, Perperikon rises above the surrounding valleys like a city sculpted from the mountain itself. Massive stone terraces, stairways, chambers, courtyards, and walls emerge naturally from the weathered bedrock, making it difficult to distinguish where nature ends and human craftsmanship begins. At sunrise, golden light spreads across the pale stone, while shadows settle into narrow passageways cut by hands long forgotten. From above, the site resembles an immense labyrinth whose purpose is only partly understood. The history of Perperikon stretches back thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests that the hill was already regarded as a sacred place during the late Stone Age, with continuous occupation extending through the Bronze Age, Iron Age, Classical Antiquity, and the medieval period. Few sites in southeastern Europe display such an unbroken sequence of human activity. Generation after generation return to the same rocky summit, rebuilding, expanding, and reshaping it while preserving its apparent spiritual importance. Among the earliest and most intriguing features is a vast, rock-cut sanctuary believed to have served the Thracians, an ancient people whose religious practices remain only partially understood. The sanctuary includes carefully carved altars, ceremonial platforms, channels, and basins cut directly into the stone. Archaeologists believe sacrifices and ritual offerings likely took place here, although the exact ceremonies performed have disappeared from history. One structure attracts particular attention. Near the heart of the complex lies a large circular altar carved into the bedrock. Evidence of repeated burning suggests that sacred fires once illuminated this space, perhaps during ceremonies connected to seasonal cycles, royal authority, or communication with the divine. Yet, without written records from the Thracians themselves, much remains open to interpretation. The stone preserves physical evidence of ritual, but not the beliefs that gave those rituals meaning. Ancient Greek writers contribute another layer to the mystery. Several classical authors described an important oracle dedicated to Dionysus somewhere within the Rhodope Mountains. According to later traditions, this sanctuary may have been consulted by powerful rulers before major campaigns. Some accounts even claim that both Philip II of Macedon and Alexander the Great received prophetic messages connected with their future conquests, although these stories survive only in later literary traditions and cannot be verified archaeologically. Could Perperikon have been the location of this legendary oracle? Many researchers consider the possibility plausible, pointing to the site's scale, antiquity, and unmistakably ceremonial character. Others urge caution, noting that no inscription directly identifies the sanctuary as the oracle described by classical sources. The Rhodope Mountains contain numerous ancient sacred sites, and assigning one specific location to the historical accounts remains difficult. Even so, the association has become one of Perperikon's most enduring mysteries. As excavations expanded, archaeologists uncovered far more than a sanctuary. Residential quarters, defensive walls, towers, workshops, storerooms, churches, and a substantial medieval fortress gradually emerged from beneath centuries of accumulated soil. Coins from different empires imported ceramics, jewelry, weapons, and religious objects reveal a settlement that continually adapted to changing political and cultural landscapes. Rather than being abandoned after a single era, Perperikon evolved repeatedly, serving different purposes while never entirely losing its significance. Yet, perhaps the greatest puzzle lies in the extraordinary amount of labor invested in reshaping the mountain itself. Thousands of tons of rock were carved using tools far simpler than those available today. Stairways descend into the stone with surprising precision. Entire rooms were hollowed from solid bedrock. Drainage channels, ceremonial spaces, and defensive structures were integrated into the natural contours with remarkable planning. Mainstream archaeology explains this achievement as the result of centuries of gradual construction by skilled communities, each generation adding to the work of those before. Alternative interpretations occasionally suggest a more mysterious past. Some independent researchers speculate that the earliest rock-cut features may predate the known Thracian occupation, representing an even older ceremonial center, whose builders have left no identifiable cultural signature. Others wonder whether the unusual geometry of certain carved spaces reflects astronomical observations tied to solstices, equinoxes, or prominent stars. While no definitive evidence confirms these ideas, the site's complex layout continues to inspire investigation from multiple perspectives. Even the abandonment of Perperikon remains only partly understood. Although portions of the settlement survived well into the medieval era, warfare, shifting political boundaries, and changing economic conditions gradually reduced its importance. Eventually, the once crowded sanctuary and fortress fell silent, leaving only wind to move through its carved corridors. Standing on the summit today, surrounded by stone shaped over countless generations, it becomes difficult to separate history from memory. Every staircase seems to lead toward another unanswered question. Every weathered altar hints at ceremonies no surviving text can fully explain. Perperikon endures as both an archaeological treasure and an enduring enigma, inviting us to wonder whether the mountain has revealed all its secrets, or whether its deepest mysteries still remain locked within the living rock itself. If Perperikon leaves us wondering whether sacred mountains can preserve echoes of forgotten rituals, our journey now follows another chain of ancient stone, this time into the rugged hills of Herzegovina. Hidden among forests and limestone ridges lies a city whose immense walls seem almost impossible for the people traditionally credited with building them. Here, mystery rises not from carved temples alone, but from colossal fortifications that continue to inspire admiration, debate, and unanswered questions. Surrounded by rolling hills near the modern town of Stolac in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the ruins of Daorson rest on a natural plateau overlooking fertile valleys that have sustained human communities for thousands of years. At first glance, the landscape appears peaceful. Olive trees, rocky slopes, and quiet streams create an atmosphere far removed from the violence that once shaped this frontier. Yet, standing before the city's surviving walls, that tranquility gives way to astonishment. Massive stone blocks, some weighing several tons, form defensive barriers unlike anything else in the region. Their carefully fitted surfaces rise with remarkable precision, creating an appearance that immediately recalls the great Cyclopean masonry found elsewhere in the ancient Mediterranean. Time has weathered their edges, but the walls still dominate the hillside with a confidence that refuses to fade. Daorson served as the capital of the Daorsi, an Illyrian people who flourished during the final centuries before the Roman conquest of the Balkans. Historical sources describe the Daorsi as influential participants in regional politics and trade, maintaining diplomatic and commercial relationships with neighboring cultures, particularly the Greek world. Archaeological discoveries support this picture, revealing imported ceramics, coins, jewelry, inscriptions, and artistic styles that reflect extensive contact across the Adriatic Sea. The settlement itself reached its greatest prominence during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. Protected by formidable fortifications, Daorson occupied a strategic location controlling routes through the surrounding valleys. Within its walls stood residential districts, public buildings, workshops, and spaces that likely served political and ceremonial functions. Although only portions of the city have been excavated, the surviving remains suggest a well-organized urban center whose influence extended far beyond its immediate surroundings. Yet, it is the walls that continue to capture nearly every visitor's attention. Constructed from enormous limestone blocks fitted tightly together without mortar, they demonstrate a level of engineering that appears extraordinary for the region and period. Some stones exceed several meters in length, their faces carefully shaped to create stable joints capable of surviving more than 2,000 years of earthquakes, weather, and conflict. Mainstream archaeology attributes this remarkable construction to skilled local builders, influenced by broader Mediterranean traditions. Similar masonry techniques appeared in several ancient cultures, particularly where large stone resources were readily available and experienced craftsmen passed specialized knowledge across generations. Trade and cultural contact with Greek colonies likely contributed additional architectural ideas without requiring direct foreign construction. Even so, the sheer scale of the fortifications continues to encourage discussion. How did the Daorsi organize the labor necessary to quarry, transport, and position such immense blocks across uneven terrain? What technologies were employed? Wooden rollers, earthen ramps, ropes, levers, and carefully coordinated teams provide reasonable explanations consistent with other ancient engineering achievements. Yet, seeing the walls in person often makes these solutions feel easier to describe than to fully imagine. The city's political history introduces further uncertainty. Ancient sources indicate that the Daorsi maintained shifting alliances during periods of intense regional conflict. At times, they cooperated with expanding Roman influence while competing with neighboring Illyrian groups. Eventually, the settlement appears to have suffered violent destruction, most likely during conflicts associated with the campaigns of the Delmati in the 2nd century BC. Archaeological evidence points toward significant damage, after which Daorson's importance gradually declined. Why such a prosperous and heavily defended city failed to recover remains only partially understood. Military defeat offers one explanation, but ancient urban centers often survived conquest and rebuilt themselves. Did changing trade routes undermine the city's economy? Did political authority shift elsewhere? Or did repeated regional instability gradually empty the settlement until only its monumental walls remained? If Daorson reminds us that even monumental cities can fade until only their walls continue telling the story, our next destination follows the eastern coast of the Adriatic Sea, where another forgotten settlement quietly overlooks a landscape shaped by centuries of conquest and exchange. Here, the silence is different. Rather than dramatic mountain sanctuaries or towering Cyclopean fortresses, the mystery of Asseria lies in the subtle traces of a city that stood at the meeting point of cultures, where every new empire left its mark without completely erasing the past. Hidden among the rolling limestone hills of northern Dalmatia in present-day Croatia, the ruins of Asseria occupy a broad plateau surrounded by fertile fields and scattered olive groves. From afar, the site appears almost ordinary. Grass now grows where streets once echoed with merchants and soldiers, while fragments of ancient masonry rise gently above the landscape. Yet, approaching the city reveals something remarkable. Sections of imposing defensive walls still stand, their enormous limestone blocks carefully fitted together, forming one of the best preserved examples of pre-Roman fortifications along the Adriatic coast. The surrounding countryside feels timeless. The wind carries little more than birdsong across weathered stone, and the horizon remains largely unchanged from what ancient travelers would have seen over 2,000 years ago. It is easy to imagine caravans arriving from inland valleys, Roman officials entering through monumental gates, and local communities gathering within walls that promised security in an often unpredictable world. Long before Rome extended its influence across the Balkans, Asseria served as an important settlement of the Liburnians, a seafaring Illyrian people renowned throughout the Adriatic for their navigation, trade, and distinctive culture. Archaeological evidence suggests that the site flourished well before Roman occupation, occupying a strategic position that connected coastal settlements with inland trade routes. Goods, ideas, and travelers passed through these hills for centuries, transforming Asseria into far more than an isolated hilltop community. When Roman authority eventually reached the region, the city entered a new chapter rather than disappearing. Instead of abandoning the settlement, Roman administrators expanded and reorganized it. Stone-paved streets, public buildings, inscriptions, water systems, and monumental architecture gradually appeared alongside older Liburnian foundations. Excavations have uncovered coins, ceramics, sculptures, jewelry, glass vessels, and funerary monuments, illustrating a community where local traditions and Roman influence existed side by side. One feature, however, continues to fascinate archaeologists more than almost any other. The city's massive defensive walls display construction techniques that span multiple periods. Some sections appear distinctly pre-Roman, composed of enormous limestone blocks assembled with remarkable precision, while later additions reflect Roman engineering methods. The walls therefore preserve more than military architecture. They record centuries of adaptation, rebuilding, and cultural transition in stone. Exactly how these fortifications evolved remains an active area of research. Did Roman builders simply strengthen existing Liburnian defenses, Or did they intentionally preserve portions of earlier walls out of practicality, respect, or convenience? Archaeological evidence suggests a combination of both, yet many structural details remain difficult to interpret because later generations repeatedly modified the same defenses. Each phase of construction concealed elements of the previous one without completely destroying them, creating a layered architectural puzzle that is still being carefully untangled. The city's monumental eastern gate offers another intriguing glimpse into its changing identity. Decorated with finely crafted stonework and inscriptions, the entrance reflected Roman civic ideals while still serving a settlement whose roots reached much deeper into regional history. Crossing through that gateway centuries ago would have meant entering a place where multiple cultures overlapped, rather than replaced one another. Latin inscriptions existed alongside older local traditions, and imported goods circulated through streets that may have followed pathways established long before Roman surveyors arrived. Yet, despite decades of excavation, many questions remain unanswered. Large portions of Asseria still lie beneath accumulated soil, vegetation, and collapsed masonry. Every archaeological campaign reveals additional buildings, workshops, residences, and burial sites that reshape previous interpretations of the city. The settlement continues to grow in complexity with each discovery, suggesting that its true scale may not yet be fully understood. If Asseria reminds us that cities rarely disappear all at once, but instead fade through centuries of quiet transformation, our next destination follows one of Europe's greatest rivers. Along the broad waters of the Danube stands a fortress that spent generations guarding the edge of an empire. Yet, despite centuries of military occupation and careful study, Capidava continues to preserve mysteries that extend far beyond its walls. Rising above a sweeping bend in the lower Danube, the ruins of Capidava occupy a limestone bluff where the river narrows before continuing toward the Black Sea. The location feels deliberate. From the fortress, the water stretches across the landscape like a moving frontier, carrying reflections of changing skies and, long ago, fleets of merchants, soldiers, and travelers. Even today, the view explains why this particular hill was chosen. Anyone approaching along the river could be seen long before reaching the walls. The surviving fortifications form an irregular rectangle, adapted to the natural contours of the rocky plateau. Weathered towers still punctuate the defensive circuit, while collapsed gateways and broken masonry hint at a settlement that once pulsed with military discipline and civilian life. Grass now covers the ancient streets, yet beneath every layer of earth lie centuries of rebuilding, destruction, and renewal. Capidava was established during the reign of the Roman Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century AD, shortly after Rome secured control over Dacia. Positioned along the Danube frontier, it became one of a chain of forts designed to monitor movement across the empire's northern boundary. Soldiers stationed here guarded river crossings, protected nearby settlements, and maintained communication with neighboring garrisons stretching for hundreds of kilometers. But Capidava was never only a military installation. Archaeological excavations reveal a thriving community that gradually developed inside and around the fortress. Barracks stood alongside workshops, homes, storage buildings, baths, and religious structures. Pottery, tools, coins, weapons, jewelry, inscriptions, and imported goods testify to a diverse population composed not only of Roman soldiers but also merchants, craftsmen, families, and local inhabitants whose lives became intertwined with the empire. One of the most remarkable aspects of Capidava is the extraordinary continuity of occupation. Although founded by Rome, the site remained active through successive centuries of political upheaval. After periods of destruction caused by invasions, the fortress was repeatedly repaired and strengthened. Byzantine builders modified earlier Roman defenses, adapting ancient walls to meet new threats while preserving much of the original layout. Every generation inherited the work of those before it, transforming Capidava into a layered record of frontier life extending across nearly a millennium. Yet, this continuity creates as many questions as it answers. Each rebuilding phase altered earlier structures, making it difficult for archaeologists to reconstruct the fortress exactly as it appeared during any single period. Foundations from different centuries overlap one another. Walls were dismantled, repaired, expanded, and reinforced repeatedly. Every excavation reveals a conversation between civilizations rather than a single frozen moment in time. The Danube itself adds another dimension to the mystery. Throughout antiquity, the river served simultaneously as a protective barrier, a commercial highway, and a cultural bridge. Roman vessels transported troops and supplies along its waters, while traders carried goods from distant provinces toward the Black Sea and beyond. Yet, rivers also change. Floods alter shorelines, channels shift, and landscapes evolve over centuries. Some researchers believe portions of the ancient harbor facilities or riverside settlements may now lie buried beneath sediments deposited long after Capidava's decline. Such possibilities continue to inspire archaeological investigation. Among the site's most intriguing discoveries are inscriptions left by soldiers, administrators, and local residents. These texts provide rare glimpses into everyday life on Rome's distant frontier, preserving names, military units, religious dedications, and official records. Yet they also remind historians how much has been lost. Countless wooden documents, textiles, and organic materials disappeared long ago, leaving only fragments from which entire chapters of history must be reconstructed. Then there is the question of the fortress's final abandonment. Historical evidence suggests that Capidava suffered repeated attacks during the migrations and conflicts that reshaped southeastern Europe. Invasions by Huns, Avars, Slavs, and later regional powers placed enormous pressure on frontier settlements throughout the Danube basin. While Capidava repeatedly recovered from earlier destruction, it eventually entered permanent decline during the medieval period. Why did this particular fortress, which had survived centuries of conflict, finally fall silent? Military pressures certainly played a role, but historians also point to changing trade routes, shifting political centers, economic decline, and broader environmental changes affecting the region. Like many frontier communities, Capidava may have gradually lost the strategic importance that had once justified its existence. Outside mainstream scholarship, more speculative interpretations occasionally emerge. Some writers have suggested that unexplored sections beneath the fortress conceal earlier settlements predating Roman occupation, pointing to evidence that local communities inhabited the area long before Trajan's engineers arrived. Others speculate about undiscovered underground passages connecting towers or leading toward the river, inspired by legends common to many ancient fortifications. While archaeological evidence confirms the presence of subterranean storage spaces and structural foundations, no extensive hidden network has yet been demonstrated. Local traditions add their own quiet mysteries. Stories speak of buried military treasures hidden during times of invasion, forgotten shrines sealed beneath collapsed buildings, and unexplored chambers where the final defenders supposedly concealed objects too valuable to surrender. These accounts belong to folklore rather than documented history, yet they continue to shape the atmosphere surrounding the site. Standing atop Capidava's surviving walls today, watching the Danube continue its timeless journey toward the sea, it becomes clear that the river has witnessed far more than any surviving record can describe. Empires arrived, expanded, and disappeared, while the current flowed onward without interruption. The fortress remains as a silent observer of those forgotten centuries, inviting a final thought that lingers long after leaving its ruins. How many voices from this ancient frontier still wait beneath the earth, preserved in places where neither history nor archaeology has yet reached. If Asseria reminds us that cities rarely disappear all at once, but instead fade through centuries of quiet transformation, our next destination follows one of Europe's greatest rivers. Along the broad waters of the Danube stands a fortress that spent generations guarding the edge of an empire. Yet, despite centuries of military occupation and careful study, Capidava continues to preserve mysteries that extend far beyond its walls. Rising above a sweeping bend in the lower Danube, the ruins of Capidava occupy a limestone bluff where the river narrows before continuing toward the Black Sea. The location feels deliberate. From the fortress, the water stretches across the landscape like a moving frontier, carrying reflections of changing skies and, long ago, fleets of merchants, soldiers, and travelers. Even today, the view explains why this particular hill was chosen. Anyone approaching along the river could be seen long before reaching the walls. The surviving fortifications form an irregular rectangle, adapted to the natural contours of the rocky plateau. Weathered towers still punctuate the defensive circuit, while collapsed gateways and broken masonry hint at a settlement that once pulsed with military discipline and civilian life. Grass now covers the ancient streets, yet beneath every layer of earth lie centuries of rebuilding, destruction, and renewal. Capidava was established during the reign of the Roman Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century AD, shortly after Rome secured control over Dacia. Positioned along the Danube frontier, it became one of a chain of forts designed to monitor movement across the empire's northern boundary. Soldiers stationed here guarded river crossings, protected nearby settlements, and maintained communication with neighboring garrisons stretching for hundreds of kilometers. But Capidava was never only a military installation. Archaeological excavations reveal a thriving community that gradually developed inside and around the fortress. Barracks stood alongside workshops, homes, storage buildings, baths, and religious structures. Pottery, tools, coins, weapons, jewelry, inscriptions, and imported goods testify to a diverse population composed not only of Roman soldiers, but also merchants, craftsmen, families, and local inhabitants whose lives became intertwined with the empire. One of the most remarkable aspects of Capidava is the extraordinary continuity of occupation. Although founded by Rome, the site remained active through successive centuries of political upheaval. After periods of destruction caused by invasions, the fortress was repeatedly repaired and strengthened. Byzantine builders modified earlier Roman defenses, adapting ancient walls to meet new threats while preserving much of the original layout. Every generation inherited the work of those before it, transforming Capidava into a layered record of frontier life extending across nearly a millennium. Yet this continuity creates as many questions as it answers. Each rebuilding phase altered earlier structures, making it difficult for archaeologists to reconstruct the fortress exactly as it appeared during any single period. Foundations from different centuries overlap one another. Walls were dismantled, repaired, expanded, and reinforced repeatedly. Every excavation reveals a conversation between civilizations rather than a single frozen moment in time. The Danube itself adds another dimension to the mystery. Throughout antiquity, the river served simultaneously as a protective barrier, a commercial highway, and a cultural bridge. Roman vessels transported troops and supplies along its waters, while traders carried goods from distant provinces toward the Black Sea and beyond. Yet rivers also change. Floods alter shorelines, channels shift, and landscapes evolve over centuries. Some researchers believe portions of the ancient harbor facilities or riverside settlements may now lie buried beneath sediments deposited long after Capidava's decline. Such possibilities continue to inspire archaeological investigation. Among the site's most intriguing discoveries are inscriptions left by soldiers, administrators, and local residents. These texts provide rare glimpses into everyday life on Rome's distant frontier, preserving names, military units, religious dedications, and official records. Yet, they also remind historians how much has been lost. Countless wooden documents, textiles, and organic materials disappeared long ago, leaving only fragments from which entire chapters of history must be reconstructed. Then there is the question of the fortress's final abandonment. Historical evidence suggests that Capidava suffered repeated attacks during the migrations and conflicts that reshaped southeastern Europe. Invasions by Huns, Avars, Slavs, and later regional powers placed enormous pressure on frontier settlements throughout the Danube basin. While Capidava repeatedly recovered from earlier destruction, it eventually entered permanent decline during the medieval period. Why did this particular fortress, which had survived centuries of conflict, finally fall silent? Military pressures certainly played a role, but historians also point to changing trade routes, shifting political centers, economic decline, and broader environmental changes affecting the region. Like many frontier communities, Capidava may have gradually lost the strategic importance that had once justified its existence. Outside mainstream scholarship, more speculative interpretations occasionally emerge. Some writers have suggested that unexplored sections beneath the fortress conceal earlier settlements predating Roman occupation, pointing to evidence that local communities inhabited the area long before Trajan's engineers arrived. Others speculate about undiscovered underground passages connecting towers or leading toward the river, inspired by legends common to many ancient fortifications. While archaeological evidence confirms the presence of subterranean storage spaces and structural foundations, no extensive hidden network has yet been demonstrated. Local traditions add their own quiet mysteries. Stories speak of buried military treasures hidden during times of invasion, forgotten shrines sealed beneath collapsed buildings, and unexplored chambers where the final defenders supposedly concealed objects too valuable to surrender. These accounts belong to folklore rather than documented history, yet they continue to shape the atmosphere surrounding the site. Standing atop Capidava's surviving walls today, watching the Danube continue its timeless journey toward the sea, it becomes clear that the river has witnessed far more than any surviving record can describe. Empires arrived, expanded, and disappeared, while the current flowed onward without interruption. The fortress remains as a silent observer of those forgotten centuries, inviting a final thought that lingers long after leaving its ruins. How many voices from this ancient frontier still wait beneath the earth, preserved in places where neither history nor archaeology has yet reached? If Capidava reminds us that rivers preserve the memory of empires long after their frontiers disappear, our journey continues toward the place where the mighty Danube finally reaches the Black Sea. Here, among vast wetlands, quiet lagoons, and endless reeds, another ancient settlement rests in remarkable isolation. Unlike the heavily fortified frontier outposts farther upstream, Argamum guarded a different threshold, the meeting point between fresh water and open sea, where commerce, migration, and mystery converged for thousands of years. Perched on the rocky heights of Cape Dolishman in present-day Romania, Argamum overlooks the tranquil waters of Lake Razim, once directly connected to the Black Sea before centuries of changing coastlines transformed the landscape. Standing atop the limestone cliffs, the view stretches across shimmering lagoons, winding channels, and distant horizons where water and sky seem to merge into one. The silence here feels almost deceptive. Birds circle overhead, reeds sway with the wind, and little suggests that this peaceful headland was once among the oldest Greek settlements on the western shores of the Black Sea. Archaeologists believe Argamum, also known in antiquity as Orgamy, was founded during the 7th century BC by Greek colonists from Miletus. This makes it one of the earliest documented Greek colonies in the region, established centuries before many neighboring settlements reached prominence. Its location offered access not only to maritime trade across the Black Sea, but also to the vast river systems flowing deep into Eastern Europe. Goods, ideas, and people passed through these waters for generations, making Argamum an important point of contact between Mediterranean civilizations and local communities. Excavations have gradually revealed the remains of a remarkably complex settlement. Stone fortification walls, residential quarters, public buildings, temples, workshops, storage facilities, and cemeteries illustrate a thriving city that evolved over many centuries. Archaeologists have uncovered imported amphorae once used for transporting wine and olive oil, locally produced pottery, bronze tools, coins, jewelry, inscriptions, and religious objects reflecting a vibrant blend of Greek traditions and indigenous cultural influences. One discovery has proven especially significant. Ancient inscriptions found at the site represent some of the earliest written records recovered from this part of the Black Sea coast. These texts provide invaluable evidence for understanding the settlement's political organization, trade relationships, and religious life. Yet, like many ancient inscriptions, they reveal only fragments of a much larger story. Every preserved name hints at countless others whose identities have disappeared forever. Argamum's strategic location also raises intriguing questions. When the colony was founded, the surrounding coastline differed dramatically from what visitors see today. Geological evidence indicates that sea levels, river channels, and coastal lagoons have shifted repeatedly over the past 2,000 years. Areas that are now marshland may once have been open harbors, while navigable waterways gradually filled with sediment carried by the Danube. This constantly changing environment complicates archaeological interpretation. How extensive was the ancient harbor? Where exactly did merchant vessels anchor before unloading their cargo? Could portions of the city's waterfront now lie buried beneath layers of sediment or submerged beneath shallow lagoons? Marine archaeology has begun exploring these possibilities, but much of the ancient shoreline remains difficult to reconstruct with precision. The city's long occupation presents another fascinating puzzle. Argamum flourished through Greek, Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine periods, adapting repeatedly to shifting political powers without losing its regional importance. Rather than experiencing abrupt cultural replacement, the settlement absorbed new influences while preserving older traditions. Temples gave way to churches, defensive walls were reinforced, and commercial networks evolved alongside changing empires. Yet, eventually, the city entered decline. Historians attribute this gradual abandonment to a combination of environmental transformation, economic shifts, military pressures, and changing trade routes. As waterways altered and regional political structures evolved, Argamum's strategic advantages slowly diminished. Unlike cities destroyed in sudden catastrophe, its disappearance appears to have unfolded over generations, a quiet fading rather than a dramatic ending. Even so, important questions remain unresolved. Large sections of the ancient settlement have yet to be excavated. Beneath accumulated soil and collapsed masonry may rest additional temples, administrative buildings, or inscriptions capable of reshaping current interpretations. Every archaeological campaign reveals unexpected structures, reminding researchers how incomplete the visible ruins truly are. Beyond established scholarship, Argamum has naturally inspired more speculative ideas. Some researchers outside the academic mainstream suggest that unexplored underwater remains near the ancient coastline could preserve harbor installations of exceptional scale, concealed by centuries of environmental change. Others imagine that submerged districts of the settlement may still survive beneath lagoon sediments, awaiting future technologies capable of revealing them without extensive excavation. Although these ideas remain unproven, they are rooted in a genuine archaeological reality. Coastlines are among the most dynamic landscapes on Earth, and many ancient ports have been dramatically altered or partially submerged through natural processes. Local folklore adds another quiet layer to the mystery. Stories passed through nearby communities speak of bells heard beneath the water during calm evenings, ancient walls visible beneath exceptionally clear conditions, and forgotten treasures resting somewhere beneath the reeds where old waterways once flowed. Whether inspired by submerged ruins, shifting light across shallow lagoons, or generations of storytelling, such legends have become inseparable from the landscape itself. Standing on the cliffs of Cape Dolishman today, it becomes impossible not to sense how much has changed since the first Greek ships approached these shores more than 26 centuries ago. The sea has retreated, rivers have rewritten the land, and civilizations have risen and disappeared. Yet, beneath the quiet grasses and surrounding waters, Argamum continues to preserve fragments of a world that connected distant cultures across the Black Sea. The visible ruins tell only part of that story. How many more remain concealed beneath the shifting shoreline, waiting for future discoveries to illuminate chapters of history that the changing landscape has kept hidden for centuries? If Argamum reminds us that changing coastlines can quietly conceal entire chapters of history, our journey now turns toward the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, where the opposite force shaped an equally remarkable mystery. Here, it was not advancing water, but an unforgiving desert that slowly reclaimed an entire city. Hidden for centuries beneath drifting sands, Qaryat al-Faw reveals how even thriving civilizations can disappear without leaving more than scattered whispers behind. On the edge of the vast empty quarter, where endless plains of sand meet rugged limestone escarpments, lie the extraordinary ruins of Qaryat al-Faw. The surrounding landscape appears almost timeless. Winds sweep across open desert, carrying fine grains that settle over ancient streets exactly as they have for generations. The silence is immense, broken only by the occasional gust moving across weathered stone foundations and collapsed walls. Standing here today, it is difficult to imagine that this seemingly isolated place once welcomed caravans arriving from every direction of the ancient world. Yet, archaeology tells a very different story. Between roughly the 1st century BC and the 4th century AD, Qaryat al-Faw flourished as one of the most important oasis cities in central Arabia. Situated along major caravan routes connecting southern Arabia with Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf, and the Mediterranean, it occupied a strategic position where merchants exchanged incense, spices, textiles, precious metals, and countless other goods. Far from being an isolated desert settlement, it became a crossroads where languages, beliefs, and cultures intersected. The city served as the capital of the kingdom of Kinda during part of its history, although its political role evolved over several centuries. Excavations have revealed broad streets, residential compounds, marketplaces, temples, administrative buildings, workshops, cemeteries, irrigation systems, and impressive architecture carefully adapted to one of the world's harshest environments. Perhaps most remarkable are the discoveries preserved beneath the desert itself. Archaeologists have uncovered beautifully carved stone sculptures, painted wall decorations, bronze objects, jewelry, coins, ceramics imported from distant regions, and hundreds of inscriptions written in several ancient scripts. These texts provide invaluable glimpses into everyday life, recording personal names, religious dedications, commercial activities, and social customs that survived only because the desert protected them beneath layers of sand. One feature continues to fascinate researchers more than almost any other. The artistic sophistication displayed throughout Qaryat al-Faw challenges long-standing assumptions about ancient Arabia. Human figures appear in sculpture and painting with remarkable realism. Decorative motifs reveal influences from Greece, Rome, Persia, southern Arabia, and local traditions, all blending into an artistic style uniquely suited to this crossroads of civilizations. Rather than existing on the margins of the ancient world, Qaryat al-Faw appears to have participated actively in an immense international network of exchange. Its prosperity depended upon movement. Caravans crossed immense distances carrying frankincense, myrrh, perfumes, leather, ivory, and luxury goods toward distant markets. Travelers brought not only merchandise but also languages, religious ideas, artistic traditions, and technological knowledge. Every arrival reshaped the city in subtle ways, creating a community whose identity reflected centuries of continuous cultural interaction. Yet, despite its remarkable success, Qaryat al-Faw eventually fell silent. Exactly why remains one of its greatest mysteries. Most historians point toward changing trade routes as the principal explanation. As political landscapes shifted and maritime commerce gradually replaced some overland caravan traffic, settlements that depended upon caravan networks inevitably lost their economic importance. Environmental changes, fluctuations in water availability, and broader regional transformations likely contributed as well. Rather than suffering sudden destruction, the city appears to have experienced a gradual decline that unfolded across generations. Still, many questions remain unanswered. How could such a prosperous urban center disappear so completely from historical memory? Ancient writers mention numerous Arabian kingdoms and caravan cities, yet surviving written records provide only fragmented references that can be confidently linked to Qaryat al-Faw. For centuries, the ruins rested largely unnoticed beneath drifting sands, their significance forgotten until modern archaeological surveys revealed the true scale of the settlement. The desert itself may be responsible for both preserving and concealing its history. Unlike humid climates that rapidly destroy organic materials, Arabia's dry environment protected delicate artifacts that might have vanished elsewhere. At the same time, shifting dunes buried buildings, streets, and inscriptions beneath protective layers of sand, effectively sealing portions of the city for nearly 2,000 years. Even today, archaeologists believe much remains hidden. Only parts of the ancient settlement have been systematically excavated. Advanced surveying technologies continue identifying buried structures extending beyond previously known limits. Every excavation season uncovers new residences, tombs, inscriptions, and artifacts that reshape understanding of the city's complexity. As often happens with remarkable archaeological discoveries, more speculative ideas have emerged alongside mainstream research. Some independent writers suggest that Qaryat al-Faw formed part of a much larger network of now lost Arabian cities, connected through sophisticated systems of trade and communication that remain only partially understood. Others propose that unexplored sections beneath the surrounding desert may conceal monumental buildings or archives capable of transforming knowledge of pre-Islamic Arabia. While no evidence currently confirms such possibilities, ongoing discoveries demonstrate that the buried landscape still holds many surprises. Local traditions contribute their own enduring mysteries. Stories speak of ancient wells whose depths remain unknown, hidden chambers protected by shifting sands, and forgotten treasures carried into the desert during times of crisis. Other legends describe entire neighborhoods still sleeping beneath untouched dunes, preserved exactly as they were when the final caravans departed. Such tales belong to folklore, yet they echo an archaeological reality. Much of Qaryat al-Faw has indeed remained concealed beneath the desert for centuries. Standing among the excavated streets today, with endless sands stretching toward the horizon, it becomes impossible not to wonder how many lives once unfolded in this unlikely oasis. Merchants negotiated agreements, artists carved elegant sculptures, priests performed ceremonies, and travelers rested before continuing journeys across one of Earth's most demanding landscapes. The desert eventually reclaimed nearly everything they left behind, but not completely. Beneath every unexcavated mound may rest another fragment of a civilization that connected continents through courage, commerce, and endurance. The greatest mystery may not be why Qaryat al-Faw disappeared, but how much of its remarkable story still waits beneath the sands, untouched since antiquity. If Qaryat al-Faw reminds us that deserts can preserve forgotten cities beneath drifting sands, our journey now returns to the rocky shores of the Adriatic, where another ancient settlement quietly overlooks the sea. Here, the mystery is shaped not by dunes or rivers, but by centuries of changing empires that repeatedly transformed the same landscape, leaving behind fragments of civilizations layered one upon another. Among those fragments stands Varvaria, a place whose surviving stones continue to challenge our understanding of the ancient Liburnian world. High above the fertile plains of northern Dalmatia, in present-day Croatia, the ruins of Varvaria occupy a commanding limestone hill overlooking the surrounding countryside. From its elevated position, the settlement enjoys panoramic views stretching toward the distant Adriatic coastline, while inland valleys open like natural corridors leading deep into the Balkan interior. Even today, the strategic value of the location is immediately apparent. Long before modern roads crossed these hills, anyone controlling this plateau could observe movement across an enormous area. The landscape itself seems almost unchanged. Dry stone, scattered shrubs, and olive groves surround the ancient walls, while the wind moves steadily across the plateau, carrying little more than the sound of birds and distant insects. It is an atmosphere that encourages quiet reflection rather than dramatic spectacle, making it easy to imagine generations who once watched these same horizons for approaching merchants, allies, or enemies. Known today through the archaeological remains near the modern village of Brybeer, Varvaria served as one of the principal centers of the Liburnians, an influential maritime people whose culture flourished along the eastern Adriatic long before Roman expansion reached the region. Although classical writers occasionally mention the Liburnians, much of their history survives only through archaeology, leaving scholars to reconstruct their society from fortifications, settlements, cemeteries, inscriptions, and material culture preserved beneath the earth. Excavations have revealed that Varvaria was occupied for many centuries, beginning well before Roman rule and continuing through the Roman and early medieval periods. Massive defensive walls enclosed the settlement, while streets, residential buildings, public spaces, religious structures, and later Roman architecture gradually transformed the hilltop into a thriving urban center. Coins, pottery, weapons, jewelry, imported goods, and inscriptions demonstrate that the city participated in commercial and political networks extending across the Adriatic and into the wider Mediterranean world. Yet, the city's greatest fascination lies in its remarkable continuity. Rather than being abandoned after conquest, Varvaria adapted repeatedly to changing political realities. The Liburnian settlement evolved into a Roman municipium, preserving elements of its earlier identity while incorporating Roman institutions, engineering, and architecture. This process of transformation unfolded gradually, allowing traces of multiple civilizations to coexist within the same archaeological landscape. The defensive walls illustrate this evolution particularly well. Some surviving sections appear to preserve construction techniques associated with the pre-Roman Liburnian community, while later modifications reflect Roman military engineering and urban planning. Archaeologists continue studying these overlapping phases to determine exactly how the settlement expanded and changed across successive centuries. Each stone seems to belong simultaneously to several different histories. The more researchers excavate, the more complicated the story becomes. Buildings, originally interpreted as Roman, sometimes reveal older foundations beneath them. Public spaces contain evidence of repeated rebuilding, while newly discovered artifacts occasionally force historians to reconsider long-accepted chronologies. Rather than presenting a simple sequence of occupation, Varvaria increasingly appears as a continuously evolving city whose inhabitants repeatedly reshaped earlier structures instead of replacing them entirely. Its position also raises broader questions. Situated between the Adriatic coast and inland trade routes, Varvaria occupied an ideal location for commerce as well as defense. Maritime goods arriving from distant ports could move inland through surrounding valleys, while local resources traveled toward coastal markets. This constant exchange likely introduced new technologies, artistic influences, religious ideas, and political alliances over many generations. Yet, surprisingly little survives in written sources describing everyday life within the city itself. Most historical accounts concerning the Liburnians were written by outsiders, often centuries after important events had already occurred. Their descriptions are valuable but incomplete, reflecting foreign perspectives rather than local voices. Archaeology therefore carries unusual importance at Varvaria, serving as the primary witness to a civilization that left relatively few surviving written records of its own. The city's eventual decline remains only partly understood. As Roman authority weakened during the later centuries AD, political instability spread throughout much of the Balkans. Invasions, administrative changes, economic shifts, and evolving trade networks altered the region dramatically. Like many ancient urban centers, Varvaria gradually lost the prominence it had maintained for generations. Rather than disappearing through a single catastrophic event, the settlement slowly changed until its ancient identity dissolved into the medieval communities that followed. Still, numerous mysteries remain beneath the surface. Only portions of the ancient city have been systematically excavated, leaving substantial areas unexplored. Ground-penetrating surveys continue identifying buried walls, streets, and buildings extending beyond previously known boundaries. Every archaeological campaign expands the visible city while reminding researchers how much remains concealed. As often happens at sites with deep historical roots, alternative theories have occasionally appeared alongside mainstream scholarship. Some independent researchers suggest that Varvaria may preserve architectural traditions inherited from much older Adriatic cultures whose influence stretched farther than currently recognized. Others speculate that ceremonial spaces from the earliest Liburnian occupation remain hidden beneath later Roman construction, protected by centuries of rebuilding. Although no conclusive evidence presently supports these interpretations, ongoing excavations continue revealing surprises that encourage careful investigation rather than premature certainty. Local folklore contributes its own enduring atmosphere. Stories passed through nearby villages speak of hidden underground passages connecting distant sections of the hill, forgotten cisterns descending deep into the limestone, and ancient treasures concealed before invading armies arrived. Other legends describe mysterious lights occasionally seen among the ruins during quiet evenings, interpreted by some as echoes of the city's forgotten guardians. These accounts belong to tradition rather than documented history, yet they reflect the powerful impression that ancient places continue to leave upon surrounding communities. Standing atop the weathered plateau today, looking across the same valleys that generations of Liburnians, Romans, merchants, and travelers once observed, it becomes difficult to separate memory from landscape. The visible ruins reveal only fragments of a settlement whose history spans well over 2,000 years. Beneath every unexplored layer may rest another chapter capable of changing how we understand the peoples who shaped the Adriatic long before their stories faded from written history. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Varvaria is not what has already been uncovered, but how much of its past still lies quietly waiting beneath the stone. If Varvaria reminds us that ancient cities often conceal multiple civilizations beneath a single landscape, our journey now moves northeast to a place where history is carved not into buried foundations, but directly into the face of a towering cliff. Here, the mystery rises above the earth itself. The Madara Plateau preserves monuments that have watched kingdoms appear and disappear, while one extraordinary image continues to challenge historians, archaeologists, and anyone who stands beneath it. The Madara Plateau rises abruptly from the plains of northeastern Bulgaria, its sheer limestone cliffs dominating the surrounding countryside for kilometers in every direction. Dense forests cover parts of the plateau, while narrow paths wind upward toward hidden caves, natural springs, and ancient sanctuaries. The higher one climbs, the quieter the landscape becomes. The only constant sound is the wind moving across the cliffs, carrying echoes through stone that has remained unchanged for millions of years. Then, almost unexpectedly, the mountain reveals its most remarkable secret. More than 20 meters above the ground, carved directly into the vertical rock face, is the famous Madara rider. The enormous relief depicts a mounted horseman thrusting a spear toward a lion lying beneath the horse's feet, while a hunting dog follows closely behind. The scene appears frozen in motion, suspended between earth and sky. Unlike statues placed upon pedestals or monuments constructed within cities, this image seems inseparable from the cliff itself, as though it emerged naturally from the mountain, rather than being created by human hands. Even after more than 13 centuries of weather, erosion, earthquakes, and changing climates, the carving remains one of Europe's most extraordinary rock monuments. Most historians date the Madara rider to the early 8th century AD, during the First Bulgarian Empire. The nearby plateau served as an important political and ceremonial center for the early Bulgarian rulers, and inscriptions surrounding the relief record significant historical events connected with several khans. These inscriptions provide valuable evidence for dating the monument and understanding its role within the expanding medieval state. Yet, the rider himself remains far more mysterious than the inscriptions surrounding him. Who exactly does the horseman represent? Some scholars identify him as Khan Tervo, or another early Bulgarian ruler celebrating military victory and royal authority. Others interpret the figure as a symbolic representation of divine kingship rather than an individual historical person. The lion beneath the horse has been understood as an image of conquered enemies, while alternative interpretations suggest broader religious symbolism connected with power, protection, or cosmic order. No inscription directly names the rider. This silence has allowed multiple interpretations to survive side by side for generations. The plateau itself adds another layer to the mystery. Long before the Bulgarian Empire emerged, the region had already attracted human activity for thousands of years. Archaeologists have documented evidence of prehistoric settlements, Thracian sanctuaries, Roman occupation, and early Christian communities scattered throughout the surrounding cliffs and caves. Hidden within the plateau are rock-cut chambers, hermit caves, ancient stairways, and traces of religious sites spanning entirely different civilizations. This remarkable continuity raises an intriguing possibility. Was the Madara rider deliberately carved into a place already regarded as sacred? Many ancient cultures selected dramatic natural landscapes for ceremonial activity, believing cliffs, mountains, and springs connected the human world with something greater. Although definitive evidence linking the rider to earlier religious traditions remains limited, the location itself suggests that the plateau possessed symbolic importance long before the monument appeared. The technical achievement also continues to inspire admiration. Carving such a large relief high above the ground into a nearly vertical limestone wall required careful planning, exceptional skill, and significant resources. Historians believe builders likely erected wooden scaffolding reaching extraordinary heights before gradually shaping the image directly into the cliff. Even with modern equipment, the project would present considerable logistical challenges. Yet, surprisingly, little documentation survives explaining how the work was organized or who actually carried it out. Outside mainstream archaeology, the monument has naturally attracted more speculative theories. Some independent researchers argue that stylistic similarities connect the writer with traditions extending deep into Central Asia, reflecting the origins of the early Bulgars before they settled in southeastern Europe. Others see influences from Persian, Thracian, or steppe nomadic art, suggesting that the relief represents a remarkable fusion of multiple cultural traditions rather than belonging exclusively to any one civilization. A few writers have gone even further, proposing that portions of the plateau conceal much older sacred landscapes upon which later rulers deliberately imposed new political symbolism. While archaeological evidence confirms long-term occupation of the area, no discoveries have conclusively demonstrated such direct continuity. Nevertheless, each new excavation reveals additional structures that complicate the already rich history of the site. The caves surrounding the plateau contribute their own quiet mysteries. For centuries, monks inhabited some of these natural chambers, transforming them into secluded places of prayer. Other caves appear to have served practical purposes, while several remain only partially explored. Local traditions speak of hidden passages extending deep into the limestone, forgotten shrines concealed behind collapsed walls, and ancient treasures protected within inaccessible caverns. Such stories belong to folklore rather than documented history, yet they reflect the enduring fascination inspired by this remarkable landscape. Perhaps the greatest mystery is how one monument continues to dominate an entire region after so many centuries. Empires have risen and disappeared. Religions have changed. Languages have evolved. Borders have shifted repeatedly. Yet the horseman remains fixed upon the cliff, watching silently across the plains exactly as generations before us have seen him. Historians can describe the carving, date its inscriptions, and compare its artistic influences, but its deepest meaning still resists complete explanation. Standing beneath the towering limestone wall today, looking upward at the rider suspended high above the earth, one cannot escape the feeling that the monument was intended to outlive those who created it. Whether it celebrates a king, a sacred protector, or an idea now lost to history, it continues to invite the same quiet question that has echoed across the Madara Plateau for centuries. What message was carved into the mountain that time itself has yet to fully reveal? If the Madara Plateau reminds us that a single monument can preserve centuries of unanswered questions, our journey now continues westward into eastern Serbia, where an entire imperial complex emerged from beneath the earth after lying forgotten for generations. Here, mystery is woven into walls, palaces, temples, and towers, not because they were hidden by myth, but because history itself almost forgot they existed. Surrounded by gentle hills and fertile valleys, the archaeological site of Gamzigrad rises quietly from the landscape, its massive fortification walls enclosing one of the most remarkable late Roman complexes ever discovered. Known in antiquity as Felix Romuliana, the site appears almost self-contained, separated from the modern world by centuries of silence. Thick stone walls, reinforced with powerful towers, still define its perimeter, while the remains of palaces, temples, courtyards, baths, and ceremonial buildings spread across the interior like fragments of an unfinished puzzle. Walking through the ruins today, it is easy to sense that this was never an ordinary Roman settlement. The architecture possesses an unusual sense of purpose, blending military strength with ceremonial grandeur. Colorful mosaics still survive beneath protective coverings, intricate geometric patterns shimmering across floors where emperors once walked. Marble columns lie broken among carefully cut stone, while decorative sculptures hint at an artistic sophistication that rivaled some of the greatest cities of the Roman Empire. Yet, for centuries, nobody knew exactly what this place had been. Local people were familiar with the imposing ruins, but their true identity remained uncertain until systematic archaeological excavations during the 20th century transformed historical understanding. Only then did inscriptions reveal the site's ancient name, Felix Romuliana, and connect it directly to one of Rome's most intriguing rulers, Emperor Galerius. Galerius ruled during the late 3rd and early 4th centuries A.D., an era marked by political instability, military reform, and profound religious change. Unlike emperors born in Rome itself, Galerius came from this very region of the Balkans. Rather than constructing another administrative capital, he chose to build an extraordinary palace complex near his birthplace, naming it in honor of his mother, Romula. This decision alone raises fascinating questions. Why invest immense resources into creating such an elaborate ceremonial residence in what was, at the time, a relatively remote province of the empire? Historical evidence suggests that Gamzigrad served not simply as a palace, but as a sacred dynastic complex combining imperial residence, ceremonial architecture, religious sanctuaries, and eventually a mausoleum where Galerius and members of his family could be honored after death. Archaeological discoveries support this remarkable vision. Within the fortified walls, excavators uncovered luxurious villas, audience halls, temples dedicated to Roman deities, bath complexes, administrative buildings, and beautifully decorated courtyards. Outside the palace, additional ceremonial structures occupy nearby hills, including monumental mausoleums connected by carefully planned processional routes. The entire landscape appears designed not merely for political administration, but for expressing imperial authority through architecture itself. One aspect continues to intrigue researchers more than almost any other. The ceremonial hill, known as Magura, contains 2 mausoleums and ritual monuments associated with the deification of Galerius and Romula. According to Roman imperial tradition, deceased rulers could undergo ceremonies symbolically elevating them to divine status. Archaeological evidence strongly supports the performance of such rituals here, yet many details remain uncertain because surviving written descriptions are limited. How exactly did these ceremonies unfold? What processions climbed the hill? What prayers were spoken? What symbols filled the air as imperial officials transformed political power into sacred memory? The stone foundations remain, but the voices that once echoed between them have disappeared. The site's architecture itself presents another enduring mystery. Gamzigrad combines influences from across the Roman world. Marble, imported from distant quarries, decorative sculptures reflecting classical traditions, elaborate mosaics, defensive engineering, and monumental ceremonial planning all converge within a relatively compact complex. Rather than representing one architectural tradition, Felix Romuliana embodies an empire drawing upon centuries of accumulated knowledge. Its construction demanded extraordinary organization. Thousands of laborers, engineers, artisans, sculptors, and craftsmen must have contributed to the project. Stone traveled great distances. Precious materials arrived from various provinces. Every mosaic required countless individually placed pieces. Yet, remarkably few written records survive describing the construction itself, leaving archaeologists to reconstruct the process from physical evidence alone. The decline of the complex remains equally compelling. Following Galerius's death, the palace continued to be occupied for a time, but gradually lost its original purpose. Political changes within the Roman Empire, Shifting centers of power, invasions, and economic transformation altered the region profoundly. The once glorious ceremonial residence was eventually abandoned, damaged during successive conflicts, and slowly reclaimed by nature. Yet, even abandonment did not erase its importance entirely. Excavations have revealed evidence that later communities reused portions of the site, adapting ancient buildings for entirely different purposes. Christian structures appeared within former imperial spaces, while medieval occupation left additional traces layered above the Roman remains. Like so many ancient places, Gamzigrad never truly disappeared. It simply changed identities across the centuries. Beyond established archaeology, the site has inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers suggest that the geometric arrangement of ceremonial buildings reflects astronomical alignments connected with imperial ritual. Others wonder whether unexplored structures outside the known walls formed part of a much larger sacred landscape, still hidden beneath surrounding fields. Although no conclusive evidence currently confirms such theories, ongoing excavations continue extending the boundaries of the known complex, reminding historians that much remains undiscovered. Local legends add another quiet dimension to the mystery. Stories speak of hidden underground passages linking distant sections of the palace, forgotten chambers containing imperial treasures, and sealed vaults protecting objects too sacred to remove. Other traditions tell of unusual lights appearing among the ruins during misty evenings, interpreted as lingering echoes of ceremonies once performed for emperors who believed themselves destined to become divine. These accounts belong to folklore rather than documented history, yet they reflect the enduring atmosphere surrounding the site. Standing within the immense walls of Gamzigrad today, surrounded by mosaics, towers, temples, and broken columns, one senses that this place was built to defy ordinary time. It celebrated power, memory, family, and eternity all at once. Yet, even an emperor's carefully planned legacy could not prevent centuries of silence from settling over the stones. The palace has surrendered many of its secrets, but countless others remain hidden beneath the earth, waiting patiently for future discoveries to illuminate another forgotten chapter of Rome's final centuries. If Gamzigrad reveals how emperors sought to preserve their legacy through monumental architecture, our journey now turns southwest into the mountains of eastern Albania, where memory was carved not into palaces, but into stone tombs overlooking quiet valleys. Here, the mystery is more intimate. Instead of celebrating imperial power, Selca I Poshtme invites us to consider the lives and deaths of rulers whose names have largely disappeared, even as their resting places continue to watch over the landscape. High above the Shkumban River Valley, surrounded by steep forested slopes and rugged limestone cliffs, the ancient necropolis of Selca I Poshtme lies hidden among the hills. The setting feels deliberately chosen. From the rocky terraces, the valley unfolds below like a natural corridor stretching toward the Adriatic Sea, while distant mountains form an almost unbroken horizon. Even today, the silence is profound. Only the wind and the occasional call of birds interrupt the stillness surrounding tombs that have endured for more than 2,000 years. Unlike many ancient burial grounds, these monuments were not built from separate blocks of stone. They were carved directly into the mountainside. Massive rock-cut chambers, monumental facades, carefully sculpted entrances, and intricate architectural details emerge naturally from the limestone itself. At first glance, they resemble miniature temples embedded within the cliff, their symmetry suggesting both artistic refinement and extraordinary technical skill. Time has softened many details, yet the tombs retain a powerful sense of permanence, as though their builders intended them to outlast every kingdom that followed. Archaeologists date the principal tombs to the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, when this region formed part of the ancient Illyrian world. Selca e Poshtme is widely believed to have served as an important political and ceremonial center, possibly connected to the Illyrian kingdom of the Enchalae or later local rulers whose influence extended across eastern Albania. Nearby excavations have revealed the remains of an ancient settlement, fortifications, roads, pottery workshops, coins, jewelry, weapons, and imported luxury goods, suggesting that this mountain community occupied a significant position within regional trade networks. The tombs themselves remain the site's greatest fascination. 5 monumental royal tombs dominate the necropolis, each displaying a different architectural design. Some feature carefully carved Ionic columns and temple-like facades reflecting strong Hellenistic influence, while others preserve distinctive local traditions. This combination reveals a society that embraced artistic ideas from the wider Mediterranean without abandoning its own cultural identity. One tomb is particularly remarkable. Its entrance leads into a spacious burial chamber whose walls were shaped with astonishing precision directly from solid rock. Niches, benches, and carefully planned interior spaces indicate that these monuments served not only as burial places, but also as settings for rituals honoring the dead. Every surface suggests deliberate symbolism, yet much of its original meaning has been lost. Who exactly rested within these chambers? Archaeologists generally agree that the tombs belong to members of the Illyrian elite, perhaps kings, nobles, or powerful regional leaders. Grave goods discovered during excavations support the presence of wealthy individuals connected to extensive commercial and political networks. Yet, inscriptions identifying the occupants are almost entirely absent. Their monuments survived. Their identities largely did not. This absence of names transforms every tomb into a puzzle. The architecture speaks clearly of authority, wealth, and prestige, but it remains silent about the individuals who inspired such extraordinary effort. Were they warrior kings who defended mountain territories? Diplomatic rulers balancing relationships between neighboring powers? Spiritual leaders whose influence extended beyond politics? The stone preserves only fragments. The surrounding landscape deepens the mystery. The Shkumbin Valley served for centuries as one of the principal routes linking the Adriatic coast with the Balkan interior. Merchants, armies, pilgrims, and travelers passed through these mountains carrying goods and ideas across vast distances. Such connections explain the mixture of local and Hellenistic artistic influences visible throughout Selca e Poshtme. Yet, they also raise broader questions about the true extent of Illyrian interaction with the ancient Mediterranean. For generations, Illyrian civilization remained poorly understood compared with Greece or Rome. Only in recent decades have archaeological discoveries begun revealing the complexity of these societies. Each excavation at Selca e Poshtme adds another piece to a history that survives far more completely in stone than in written records. Ancient authors mention the Illyrians frequently, but usually through the perspective of outsiders. The people buried here left remarkably few surviving texts describing themselves. As often happens with extraordinary archaeological sites, more speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some independent researchers have suggested that the exceptional precision of the rock-cut tombs reflects architectural traditions inherited from much older cultures occupying the Balkans before recorded history. Others point to similarities with monumental tombs elsewhere in the Mediterranean, proposing that highly skilled artisans traveled greater distances than historians once believed, sharing techniques across kingdoms separated by hundreds of kilometers. While archaeological evidence confirms broad cultural interaction throughout the Hellenistic world, many details of these connections remain subjects of ongoing investigation. Local folklore has long added another dimension to the site. Stories passed down through nearby villages tell of hidden burial chambers extending deeper into the mountain than archaeologists have yet explored. Legends describe sealed passages protecting royal treasures, sacred objects concealed from invading armies, and underground rooms whose entrances disappeared centuries ago beneath collapsed rock. These tales belong to tradition rather than verified history, yet the mountain still contains unexplored areas, leaving room for future discoveries. Standing before the towering facades today, it becomes impossible not to feel the quiet ambition behind their creation. These monuments were designed to preserve memory against the passage of time. They succeeded in one sense. The tombs remain almost exactly where their builders intended. Yet the lives they commemorated have faded into uncertainty, leaving architecture to speak where names no longer survive. Every carved doorway invites the same lingering thought. Beneath these silent mountains, how many more forgotten rulers still wait in darkness, their stories preserved only by the stone that continues to guard them? If the royal tombs of Selca and Poshtme remind us that stone can preserve memory long after names have faded, our journey now climbs into the forested mountains of ancient Dacia, where another monument still stands as a silent witness to a civilization that challenged one of history's greatest empires. Here, among steep ridges and dense woodlands, Blidaru Fortress continues to guard secrets that extend far beyond its weathered walls. Hidden high within Romania's Orăștie Mountains, Blidaru Fortress rises above narrow valleys wrapped in thick forests of beech and oak. Mist often drifts through the surrounding hills during the early morning, softening the outlines of the ancient walls until they seem to emerge naturally from the mountainside itself. The climb toward the fortress is long and demanding, winding through rugged terrain where every step reinforces the strategic brilliance of its location. Long before visitors reach the summit, it becomes clear that anyone attempting to attack this place would have faced an almost impossible challenge. The fortress occupies a commanding ridge with sweeping views across the surrounding mountains. From its highest points, distant passes and valleys unfold in nearly every direction, allowing defenders to observe approaching enemies long before they reach the outer defenses. Nature itself became part of the fortress, transforming steep slopes and dense woodland into formidable obstacles that complemented carefully constructed walls. Blidaru was one of several major strongholds built by the Dacians during the final centuries before the Roman conquest. Archaeologists generally date its principal construction to the 1st century BC and the early 1st century AD, when the Dacian kingdom reached the height of its power under rulers such as Burebista and later Decebalus. Together with nearby fortresses, including the famous capital at Sarmizegetusa Regia, Blidaru formed part of an integrated defensive network protecting the mountainous heartland of the kingdom. Even today, the surviving masonry commands admiration. The fortress walls combine carefully cut limestone blocks with earth and timber construction techniques unique to Dacian engineering. Archaeologists refer to this distinctive style as murus dacicus, a sophisticated system in which parallel stone walls were reinforced by timber beams and packed with compacted earth and rubble. The result created remarkably durable fortifications capable of resisting both earthquakes and prolonged military assaults. The engineering is particularly striking because it reflects innovation rather than imitation. Although the Dacians maintained contact with Greek colonies and later confronted Roman armies, their defensive architecture developed its own distinctive character. Excavations have revealed multiple defensive terraces, towers, gates, reservoirs, and carefully planned internal spaces, suggesting that Blidaru functioned not merely as a military outpost, but as a carefully organized fortress, capable of supporting extended occupation during times of conflict. One feature continues to fascinate researchers. Within the fortress lies an advanced water storage system that supplied defenders even during lengthy sieges. In mountain fortifications where access to fresh water often determined survival, such engineering represented an extraordinary strategic advantage. Archaeologists have uncovered cisterns and sophisticated methods of collecting and preserving water, demonstrating that the builders anticipated prolonged warfare with remarkable foresight. Yet, despite decades of study, many questions remain unanswered. Exactly how many people lived within the fortress during periods of crisis? Was Blidaru permanently occupied by soldiers, or did nearby communities retreat inside its walls only when danger approached? Archaeological evidence provides valuable clues but no definitive answers. The fortress appears to have fulfilled several roles simultaneously: military stronghold, regional administrative center, and perhaps even a place of political importance within the wider Dacian kingdom. Its relationship with neighboring fortresses adds another layer of intrigue. Blidaru did not stand alone. Signal systems may have connected it visually with nearby strongholds across the mountain landscape. Fires, smoke, or other methods of communication could have carried warnings rapidly between distant defensive positions, allowing coordinated responses long before invading forces reach the heart of Dacia. Although such systems are considered plausible based on geography and comparative evidence, many details remain impossible to reconstruct with certainty. Then came the Roman Wars. During the campaigns of Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century AD, the Dacian fortresses faced one of the most disciplined military machines of the ancient world. Historical sources describe fierce resistance as Roman legions advanced through the mountains, overcoming one fortified position after another. Blidaru almost certainly played a significant role within this defensive struggle, although surviving records mention relatively few details concerning the fortress itself. Archaeological evidence indicates destruction associated with the Roman conquest, yet the precise sequence of events remains uncertain. Did the defenders abandon the fortress before its final capture? Was it destroyed during direct assault, deliberately dismantled afterward, or gradually abandoned once Roman authorities secured the region? Each possibility finds some support, but no single explanation accounts for every archaeological observation. Beyond established scholarship, Blidaru has inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers argue that the precision of Dacian stonework and the complexity of the defensive network suggest a level of political organization greater than traditionally recognized. Others wonder whether undiscovered underground passages once connected parts of the fortress, providing concealed movement during siege conditions. While no archaeological evidence has confirmed extensive tunnel systems, limited subterranean features have been documented at several Dacian sites, leaving the subject open to continued investigation. Local folklore naturally enriches the mystery. Generations have spoken of hidden treasures buried within the surrounding mountains before the Roman conquest, guarded by secret passages known only to the last Dacian defenders. Other stories describe unexplored chambers sealed beneath collapsed walls or sacred places hidden deep within nearby forests where priests once performed rituals beyond the reach of ordinary people. These tales belong to legend rather than documented history, yet they persist because the mountains themselves seem capable of protecting secrets indefinitely. Standing among the weathered walls of Blidaru today, surrounded by forests that have reclaimed much of the ancient landscape, it becomes easy to understand why the fortress still commands such fascination. The stones testify to remarkable engineering, determined resistance, and a civilization whose achievements continue to emerge only gradually through archaeology. Yet, beyond every excavated wall lies another unanswered question. How much of ancient Dacia still sleeps beneath these mountains, waiting for future discoveries to reveal stories that neither Rome nor time succeeded in completely erasing? If Blidaru Fortress reminds us that mountains can conceal the final strongholds of forgotten kingdoms, our journey now crosses into central Italy, where the mystery lies not behind defensive walls, but within an immense city of the dead. Here, towering cliffs have become silent archives, their faces carved with monumental tombs that outlived the civilization responsible for creating them. Among these haunting landscapes, Norchia remains one of the least visited and most enigmatic survivors of the ancient Etruscan world. Hidden within the rugged countryside of northern Lazio, Norchia rests inside a deep volcanic valley, where steep cliffs rise dramatically above winding streams and dense forests. Thick vegetation covers much of the landscape, while moss, ivy, and ancient oak trees gradually reclaim the stone. At first glance, the valley appears untouched by history. Then the cliffs begin to reveal impossible shapes. Entire facades emerge from the rock. Enormous doorways overlook empty ravines, and monumental staircases ascend toward chambers that have remained silent for more than 2,000 years. The effect is almost surreal. Unlike conventional cemeteries, Norchia was designed as an immense necropolis, integrated directly into the surrounding cliffs. Hundreds of tombs were carved into volcanic tuff, their elaborate facades imitating temples, houses, and ceremonial buildings. The landscape itself became architecture. Every cliff transformed into a place where the living confronted memory through stone. The origins of Norchia stretch back to the Etruscans, one of the most influential civilizations of pre-Roman Italy. Although occupation in the surrounding area began earlier, the monumental tombs that define the site were primarily constructed between the 4th and 2nd centuries BC, during the final centuries of Etruscan independence before Roman expansion gradually absorbed their territories. The Etruscans remain among antiquity's greatest historical puzzles. They built prosperous cities, mastered advanced metallurgy, developed sophisticated religious traditions, and profoundly influenced early Roman civilization. Yet, much of their language remains only partially understood, and relatively few surviving literary texts preserve their own perspective. Most written descriptions come from Greek and Roman authors, leaving archaeology to reconstruct the voices that history almost erased. Norchia offers one of the richest opportunities to understand that vanished world. The tombs display remarkable architectural diversity. Some feature towering columns supporting triangular pediments inspired by classical temples. Others resemble elegant residences, complete with carved doors, decorative moldings, and carefully proportioned facades. Interior burial chambers often contain benches, niches, and multiple rooms arranged to accommodate generations of the same family. Every monument seems designed not only to honor the dead, but also to express status, identity, and permanence. One remarkable aspect of Norchia is its scale. Unlike isolated royal tombs built for individual rulers, this necropolis accommodated an entire elite community. Walking through the valley today feels less like visiting a cemetery than exploring the abandoned streets of another city, one constructed exclusively for those who had already departed from life. This unusual relationship between architecture and landscape raises enduring questions. Why invest such extraordinary effort into monumental tombs hidden within remote valleys? The Etruscans believed the afterlife reflected many aspects of earthly existence, and burial architecture played a central role in expressing that belief. Tombs often contained objects intended to accompany the deceased, including pottery, jewelry, weapons, furniture, and ceremonial goods. Yet, many symbolic details remain difficult to interpret because surviving religious texts are so limited. Archaeologists continue uncovering clues through excavation. Painted fragments, sculptural decoration, inscriptions, imported ceramics, and luxury goods reveal extensive commercial connections throughout the Mediterranean. Families buried at Norchia clearly participated in regional trade networks and possessed considerable wealth. Even so, the identities of many tomb owners remain unknown. Their monuments survived. Their names often did not. The surrounding valley adds another layer of mystery. Ancient roads, known as Vi Cave, deep sunken pathways carved through volcanic rock, connect Norchia with neighboring settlements. Some of these roads descend several meters below the natural ground level, creating narrow stone corridors unlike ordinary routes. Historians generally interpret them as transportation passages gradually worn deeper through centuries of use, though religious processions and ceremonial functions have also been suggested in certain cases. Their true significance continues to inspire debate. Did funeral processions once move silently through these enclosed passageways before reaching the necropolis? Were they simply practical roads shaped by erosion and constant traffic? Or did they serve both practical and symbolic purposes within Etruscan religious life? The evidence allows several possibilities without fully resolving the question. Norchia itself experienced a remarkably long history. Following the Roman absorption of Etruscan territories, the surrounding settlement continued to exist in altered form. During the medieval period, defensive structures and churches appeared within the ancient landscape, adding new layers to a place already shaped by centuries of human activity. Eventually, however, the settlement declined, leaving forests and vegetation to reclaim much of the valley. Today, the isolation of Norchia contributes significantly to its atmosphere. Unlike many famous archaeological sites, it receives relatively few visitors. Large sections remain partially obscured by vegetation, while ongoing archaeological work continues revealing structures previously hidden beneath soil and roots. Each season brings fresh discoveries, reminding researchers that much of the necropolis remains only partially understood. As often happens at sites of exceptional mystery, alternative interpretations have emerged alongside established scholarship. Some independent researchers propose that certain tomb alignments correspond with astronomical events or seasonal observations important to Etruscan religious practice. Others suggest that undiscovered ceremonial areas may still lie concealed beneath the surrounding woodland, connecting the visible necropolis with sacred spaces yet to be identified. While these ideas remain unproven, they reflect the reality that Norchia has not revealed all of its secrets. Local traditions preserve their own quiet legends. Stories speak of hidden burial chambers sealed behind collapsed rock, underground passages linking distant cliffs, and forgotten treasures protected by the spirits of ancient families who refuse to abandon their resting places. During mist-covered mornings, some villagers once believed the valley itself seemed inhabited by silent figures moving among the tomb facades before disappearing with the rising sun. These tales belong to folklore rather than documented history, yet they capture the powerful impression created by this extraordinary landscape. Standing beneath the towering cliffs today, surrounded by monumental tombs carved directly into living stone, one cannot help feeling that Norchia was built to preserve far more than human remains. It preserves fragments of a civilization whose language still resists complete understanding and whose beliefs survive only in scattered traces. Every unopened chamber, every weathered inscription, and every unexplored section of the valley hints that the Etruscans may still have stories waiting patiently beneath the stone, hidden until someone learns how to read their final messages. If Norchia reminds us that entire cities of the dead can remain hidden within quiet valleys, our journey now leaves the Italian mainland and crosses the Mediterranean to the island of Majorca. Here, another ancient community chose stone as its language, but instead of carving mountainsides into tombs, its people raised immense walls and mysterious monuments whose original purpose continues to invite careful debate. At the heart of this enduring puzzle stands Ses Païsses, one of the best preserved settlements of the island's enigmatic Talaiotic culture. Nestled among rolling fields of olive trees, almond groves, and low limestone hills, Ses Païsses appears almost timeless. Dry stone walls crisscross the surrounding countryside, while the distant mountains of the Serra de Levant frame the horizon. At first, the ruins blend naturally into the landscape. Massive blocks of weathered limestone seem almost indistinguishable from the earth itself. But as visitors move closer, an unmistakable pattern begins to emerge. Towering defensive walls, monumental gateways, circular buildings, and enormous stone structures reveal a settlement carefully planned by hands that worked here nearly 3,000 years ago. Silence dominates the site. The wind passes gently through the trees, birds nest among ancient stones, and sunlight shifts across walls that have survived centuries of changing civilizations. Unlike many famous archaeological sites transformed by later construction, Ses Païsses retains an atmosphere of remarkable isolation. It feels less like an abandoned city and more like a place patiently waiting for someone to understand its original purpose. Archaeologists date the earliest occupation of Ses Païsses to approximately the late 2nd millennium BC, although its most significant development occurred during the Talaiotic period, beginning around the 9th century BC. The Talaiotic culture flourished across Majorca and Minorca long before Roman rule, constructing distinctive stone settlements unlike those found elsewhere in the Mediterranean. The defining feature of this civilization was its monumental architecture. At the center of Ses Païsses stands a massive talaiot, a circular stone tower built from enormous limestone blocks assembled without mortar. Even after thousands of years, the structure remains astonishingly intact. Similar towers appear throughout the Balearic Islands, yet their precise function continues to inspire discussion among archaeologists. Were these towers primarily defensive fortifications? Did they serve as watchtowers overlooking surrounding territory? Could they have functioned as symbols of political authority, ceremonial gathering places, or combinations of all these purposes? Excavations have revealed evidence supporting several possibilities, but no single explanation accounts for every talaiot discovered across the islands. Surrounding the central tower lies a carefully organized settlement enclosed by an imposing defensive wall. One monumental entrance still survives, framed by enormous upright stones supporting a massive horizontal lintel. Passing through this gateway today creates a striking impression. The proportions suggest that controlling access to the community held great importance, yet the settlement's internal organization also reflects everyday domestic life. Archaeologists have uncovered houses, workshops, storage areas, courtyards, hearths, and communal spaces revealing generations of continuous occupation. The people who lived here developed a sophisticated society adapted to island life. Animal husbandry, agriculture, trade, and skilled craftsmanship supported the community for centuries. Pottery, bronze tools, ornaments, grinding stones, and imported objects demonstrate that Ses Païsses maintained contact with neighboring Mediterranean cultures while preserving its own distinctive traditions. Yet, surprisingly little survives to explain their beliefs. Unlike civilizations that left extensive written records, the Talaiotic people communicated primarily through architecture and material culture. Their language disappeared without preserving readable texts capable of explaining why these monumental structures were built or what symbolic meanings they held. Every interpretation must therefore emerge from careful archaeological investigation rather than historical documents. One aspect continues to intrigue researchers. Many Talaiotic monuments across Majorca and Minorca appear to have been rebuilt, expanded, or modified over several centuries. Rather than abandoning older structures, later generations repeatedly incorporated them into evolving settlements. This continuity suggests that ancestral memory played an important role within Talaiotic society. although the exact nature of that relationship remains uncertain. Ses Païsses reflects this long process of transformation. Its earliest buildings gradually evolved as social organization changed. New construction techniques appeared, and outside influences reached the islands through maritime trade. Later contact with Phoenician merchants, Carthaginian expansion, and eventually Roman authority introduced additional cultural changes without immediately erasing older traditions. Even after Roman influence spread across the Balearic Islands, traces of the Taliotic past endured. Archaeological evidence indicates that parts of the settlement remained occupied during subsequent periods, demonstrating remarkable resilience despite profound political transformation. Like many ancient communities, Ses Païsses adapted rather than disappeared overnight. Still, many mysteries remain beneath the surface. Only portions of the settlement have been fully excavated, and modern archaeological methods continue identifying buried structures extending beyond visible remains. Ground-penetrating surveys suggest that additional buildings may still lie concealed beneath accumulated soil, waiting to expand our understanding of how this remarkable community functioned. As with many prehistoric monuments, more speculative theories have occasionally emerged. Some independent researchers have proposed that the central taliyot and surrounding architecture were intentionally aligned with celestial events, serving as astronomical observatories as well as social gathering places. Others suggest that the massive towers formed part of an island-wide communication network, allowing distant settlements to exchange visual signals across Majorca. While geographic visibility between certain sites makes limited signaling plausible, no definitive archaeological evidence confirms a comprehensive communication system. Local folklore adds another quiet layer of mystery. Stories passed down through generations describe hidden underground chambers beneath the taliyot, secret passages connecting distant monuments, and ancient guardians watching over treasures concealed within the stone. During certain evenings, some traditions claim that unusual echoes travel through the ruins, as though voices from another age still linger among the weathered walls. Such accounts belong to folklore rather than historical documentation, yet they reflect the enduring fascination inspired by these monuments. Standing inside the ancient gateway today, surrounded by Cyclopean walls that have endured for nearly 3,000 years, one cannot escape the feeling that Ses Païsses still holds far more than archaeology has uncovered. Its builders left no surviving books, no detailed inscriptions, and no direct explanation for the remarkable world they created. Instead, they entrusted their story to stone. Every unexplored foundation, every buried chamber, and every towering block invites the same quiet reflection. How much of the Taliotic civilization still remains hidden beneath the island's peaceful landscape, waiting for the next discovery to give voice to a people who chose silence over words? If Ses Païsses reminds us that entire civilizations can speak through stone alone, our journey now returns to the mountains of central Italy, where another ancient city stands in remarkable silence. Here, the mystery is not simply how a settlement survived for centuries, but why a place once considered vital to the Roman Republic gradually faded into history, leaving behind streets, temples, and walls that seem almost frozen in time. Among the Apennine peaks, Alba Fucens continues to guard answers that have never been fully uncovered. Perched on a broad plateau, nearly 1,000 meters above sea level, Alba Fucens overlooks the vast Fucine Basin, a landscape that once held one of Italy's largest lakes before it was drained in the 19th century. Rugged mountains surround the ancient city on every side, creating a dramatic natural fortress. Even today, the scenery possesses a quiet grandeur. The wind moves across open grasslands, broken columns rise among wildflowers, and distant ridges cast shifting shadows over streets that have remained undisturbed for centuries. The location immediately explains why the Romans valued this place. From here, major routes through the Apennines could be observed and controlled, linking central Italy with the Adriatic coast and the southern peninsula. Whoever held Alba Fucens possessed a strategic gateway between regions that were often contested during the expansion of Roman power. The city's history began during a period of profound transformation. Founded as a Roman colony in 303 BC, following campaigns against the Equi, Alba Fucens quickly developed into one of the Republic's most important military and administrative outposts. Thousands of Roman colonists settled here, establishing a carefully planned city whose influence extended far beyond its mountain setting. Unlike many colonies that served only local purposes, Alba Fucens became deeply involved in major events shaping Roman history. Its formidable defenses made it an ideal location for holding important political prisoners. Ancient sources record that several defeated kings, including Syphax of Numidia and Perseus of Macedon, were confined here after their capture by Rome. Imagine arriving at this isolated mountain city after ruling powerful kingdoms, surrounded not by royal courts, but by towering stone walls and unfamiliar peaks. For these rulers, Alba Fucens represented not merely imprisonment, but the undeniable reach of Roman authority. Walking through the archaeological site today reveals a remarkably complete urban landscape. Wide paved streets still follow their original grid. The remains of a forum, basilica, temples, markets, baths, workshops, residential districts, and an impressive amphitheater preserve the outline of a thriving Roman community. Massive, polygonal walls, built from enormous limestone blocks fitted together with extraordinary precision, continue to encircle much of the settlement. These walls remain one of Alba Fucens' greatest architectural mysteries. Although the Roman colony was established in the early 3rd century BC, portions of the fortifications display construction techniques commonly associated with earlier Italic peoples, particularly the Marsi or Aequi. The enormous stones were shaped and assembled without mortar, creating walls of remarkable strength that have survived earthquakes, invasions, and more than 2 millennia of weathering. Exactly who constructed the earliest sections remains the subject of ongoing study. Some archaeologists argue that the Romans incorporated pre-existing defensive works into the expanding colony, while others believe local builders employed long-established regional techniques under Roman supervision. Either explanation reflects a fascinating blend of indigenous knowledge and Roman engineering, rather than a simple replacement of one culture by another. The city's relationship with the surrounding landscape presents another enduring puzzle. For much of its history, nearby Lake Fucinus dominated the region both economically and environmentally. The enormous lake supported fishing, transportation, agriculture, and local trade, while also presenting constant challenges through seasonal flooding. Roman engineers famously attempted to regulate the lake by constructing an ambitious drainage tunnel under Emperor Claudius during the 1st century AD, one of antiquity's greatest engineering projects. Although the tunnel partially succeeded, controlling the lake proved far more difficult than anticipated. Its changing shoreline continually reshaped the surrounding countryside, influencing agriculture, commerce, and settlement patterns. Alba Fucens therefore existed within a landscape that was never entirely stable, forcing its inhabitants to adapt to environmental conditions beyond human control. Archaeology continues revealing how complex daily life became inside the colony. Excavations have uncovered imported ceramics from across the Mediterranean, finely crafted sculptures, inscriptions, coins, religious objects, household tools, and evidence of thriving commercial activity. Temples dedicated to Roman gods stood alongside local traditions that likely persisted for generations beneath the surface of official religion. Yet, despite its importance, Alba Fucens eventually declined. Historians attribute this gradual transformation to several interconnected factors, including shifting trade routes, political reorganization, changing military priorities, and the broader instability that affected the Western Roman Empire during its final centuries. Earthquakes also damaged parts of the settlement repeatedly, forcing reconstruction while slowly diminishing its regional significance. Unlike cities destroyed through sudden catastrophe, Alba Fucens faded gradually. Centuries passed as buildings were abandoned, reused, dismantled for construction materials, or incorporated into medieval settlements. The once bustling streets grew quiet, while nature slowly reclaimed plazas where merchants, soldiers, magistrates, and prisoners had once gathered. Still, many mysteries remain. Only part of the ancient city has been fully excavated. Ground surveys continue identifying buried structures extending beyond visible ruins, suggesting that substantial portions remain hidden beneath accumulated soil. Every archaeological season uncovers additional buildings, inscriptions, or artifacts capable of refining our understanding of the colony's evolution. As with many remarkable Roman sites, alternative theories occasionally appear alongside mainstream scholarship. Some independent researchers suggest that the polygonal walls preserve engineering knowledge inherited from much older Italic cultures, whose capabilities have long been underestimated. Others point to the extraordinary precision of the stonework, proposing that construction methods now lost allowed builders to move and position enormous limestone blocks with surprising efficiency. While archaeology explains much of this achievement through skilled labor, careful planning, and abundant manpower, the exact techniques employed continue to invite investigation. Local folklore adds another layer to the atmosphere. Legends speak of sealed tunnels extending beneath the ancient city toward the surrounding hills, hidden chambers containing treasures left behind during times of invasion, and forgotten sanctuaries concealed beneath later Roman buildings. Some stories even describe mysterious lights appearing among the ruins on quiet evenings, interpreted as lingering echoes of soldiers still guarding the mountain colony. These traditions belong to local imagination rather than documented history, yet they reflect the powerful impression left by the landscape. Standing within the ancient forum today, surrounded by weathered columns and overlooked by mountains that have witnessed every chapter of the city's history, it becomes impossible not to wonder how many lives unfolded here beyond the reach of surviving records. Alba Fucens was more than a military colony. It was a crossroads of cultures, an imperial prison, an engineering achievement, and a community shaped by both human ambition and the forces of nature. Yet, beneath its quiet streets, countless unanswered questions remain buried. Every unexplored foundation, every unread inscription, and every hidden chamber suggests that the mountain still protects stories capable of reshaping what we know about one of Rome's most remarkable forgotten cities. If Alba Fucens reminds us that even Rome's strongest mountain colonies could gradually fade into silence, our journey now crosses the Adriatic once more to the rugged highlands of southern Albania. Here, another forgotten city rests above winding river valleys, its stone walls overlooking landscapes that have changed little since antiquity. Unlike the carefully planned Roman colonies, Amantia reflects the meeting point of several civilizations, where local traditions, Greek influence, and Roman expansion merged into a history that still resists complete explanation. High on a broad, limestone ridge overlooking the Vjosa River basin, the ruins of Amantia emerge from rolling hills covered with wild grasses, oak forests, and scattered olive trees. From its elevated position, the city commands sweeping views across valleys that once carried merchants, shepherds, and armies between the Adriatic coast and the mountainous interior of the Balkans. The setting is both beautiful and imposing. Cool winds move constantly across the plateau, while the silence is broken only by birds and distant livestock grazing among stones that have remained in place for more than 2,000 years. At first glance, the ruins appear deceptively modest. Broken columns, weathered foundations, and sections of defensive walls blend naturally into the landscape. Yet, as the outlines of the ancient city become clearer, its remarkable scale begins to reveal itself. Massive fortifications encircle the settlement, while the remains of temples, public buildings, streets, reservoirs, residential quarters, and one of the best-preserved ancient stadiums in the Balkans testify to a community that once flourished far from the better-known centers of Greece and Rome. Amantia first emerged as an important settlement during the Iron Age, although archaeological evidence suggests human activity in the surrounding region stretches back even earlier. By the 4th century BC, it had developed into the principal city of the Amantes, an Illyrian people whose territory occupied parts of present-day southern Albania. Over time, however, the city evolved into something far more complex than a purely Illyrian stronghold. Greek cultural influence became increasingly visible. Inscriptions written in Greek, architectural styles inspired by Hellenistic traditions, imported pottery, coins, and religious practices all demonstrate that Amantia participated actively in the wider Mediterranean world. Yet, the city never completely abandoned its local identity. Instead, it developed into a remarkable cultural crossroads where indigenous customs and foreign influences coexisted across generations. This blending of traditions remains one of Amantia's greatest mysteries. How did the inhabitants define themselves? Were they primarily Illyrian, increasingly Hellenized, or members of a unique regional society that cannot easily fit into modern historical categories? Archaeological evidence reveals elements of each interpretation, but no single explanation fully captures the city's cultural complexity. One structure immediately captures attention. The ancient stadium, built into the natural slope of the hillside, reflects architectural traditions commonly associated with Greek cities. Stone seating still survives along portions of the structure, while its carefully engineered design demonstrates impressive understanding of terrain and construction. Athletic competitions almost certainly took place here, drawing spectators from across the surrounding region. Yet, the stadium also raises intriguing questions. Why would a mountain city invest considerable resources into constructing such a sophisticated public venue? Beyond sporting events, gatherings here may have served political, religious, or diplomatic purposes that reinforced civic identity. Without extensive written records describing local ceremonies, archaeology provides only fragments of the larger picture. Nearby stand the remains of temples dedicated to ancient deities. One sanctuary is generally associated with Aphrodite, although the evidence remains incomplete. Other sacred spaces reveal changing religious practices as Greek influence expanded throughout the region before eventually giving way to Roman administration and, centuries later, Christianity. Like many ancient cities, Amantia did not simply replace one belief system with another. Instead, religious traditions appear to have evolved gradually, leaving overlapping traces throughout the archaeological record. The city's fortifications deserve equal admiration. Stretching for more than 2 kilometers, the defensive walls follow the contours of the surrounding hills with remarkable precision. Built from carefully cut limestone blocks, they transformed the mountain into a natural fortress while preserving commanding views across nearby valleys. These walls were not merely barriers against attack. They also symbolized the wealth, organization, and political ambitions of the community that constructed them. Trade played an equally important role. Although located inland, Amantia maintained strong connections with Adriatic ports and neighboring settlements through well-established routes crossing the surrounding mountains. Excavations have uncovered imported ceramics, coins from distant regions, bronze objects, jewelry, and luxury goods reflecting participation in extensive commercial networks stretching across the eastern Mediterranean. Still, much about daily life remains unknown. Archaeologists continue uncovering houses workshops, storage facilities, and public buildings, gradually reconstructing how the inhabitants organize their community. Every excavation season adds new information, yet the city still guards many unanswered questions beneath layers of soil, untouched for centuries. Its decline unfolded slowly. Following Roman incorporation into the expanding empire, Amantia retained regional importance for several centuries. Administrative reforms, economic shifts, earthquakes, changing trade routes, and the gradual transformation of the late Roman world eventually reduced its prominence. During the early medieval period, much of the city was abandoned, leaving nature to reclaim streets once filled with merchants, officials, athletes, and pilgrims. Unlike cities destroyed in spectacular catastrophe, Amantia simply slipped into silence. This quiet disappearance contributes greatly to its enduring mystery. Beyond mainstream archaeology, the site has naturally inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers suggest that unexplored sections of the plateau conceal ceremonial complexes predating the visible Hellenistic city, pointing to the strategic location and long sequence of occupation. Others propose that sophisticated hydraulic systems beneath the settlement remain only partially understood, hinting at engineering achievements greater than currently documented. While these ideas remain subjects of investigation rather than established fact. Ongoing archaeological work continues revealing structures that surprise even experienced researchers. Local traditions preserve their own stories. Villagers have long spoken of hidden tunnels running beneath the ancient walls, underground chambers protecting forgotten treasures, and sacred springs known only to the earliest inhabitants of the mountain. Some legends describe mysterious sounds echoing across the stadium during exceptionally quiet evenings, as though distant crowds still gathered where competitions ended thousands of years ago. These tales belong to folklore, yet they reflect the remarkable atmosphere that continues to surround the site. Standing upon the ancient ridge today, surrounded by weathered stone and sweeping mountain horizons, it becomes clear that Amantia represents far more than another forgotten city. It embodies centuries of cultural exchange, adaptation, and resilience at the crossroads of civilizations. The visible ruins tell an extraordinary story, but they are almost certainly incomplete. Beneath unexcavated foundations, collapsed buildings, and untouched terraces may still rest inscriptions, sanctuaries, or entire neighborhoods capable of transforming our understanding of the people who once called this mountain home. The greatest mystery may not be what archaeologists have already uncovered, but what Amantia has quietly protected beneath its stones for more than 2,000 years. If Amantia reminds us that ancient cities often flourished where cultures met and blended, our journey now crosses the sea once again to the island of Sardinia. Here, the landscape is dotted with thousands of mysterious stone towers, unlike anything else in the ancient Mediterranean. Among them, one site stands as perhaps the most complete window into a civilization that left behind remarkable architecture but almost no written history. Hidden among olive trees and Mediterranean shrubs, Palmavera continues to challenge everything we think we know about the people who built it. Just a few kilometers from the northwestern coast of Sardinia, Palmavera rests upon gently rolling ground where the scent of wild rosemary, juniper, and myrtle drifts through the warm sea air. Beyond the settlement, the Mediterranean stretches toward the horizon, while limestone hills rise quietly inland. At first glance, the ruins appear almost organic, as though enormous stones had naturally settled into circles over countless centuries. Yet, a closer look reveals extraordinary planning. Massive towers, thick defensive walls, carefully arranged courtyards, meeting spaces, and clusters of circular dwellings form a sophisticated community whose origins reach deep into prehistoric Europe. The silence surrounding Palmavera feels unusually complete. There are no towering temples or triumphal arches here. Instead, there is balance, symmetry, and a remarkable harmony between architecture and landscape. Every stone appears intentionally placed, creating an impression that the builders understood not only engineering, but also the rhythms of the environment surrounding them. Palmavera belongs to the mysterious Nuragic civilization, a culture unique to Sardinia that flourished from roughly the 18th century BC until the early centuries of Roman influence. During that immense span of time, thousands of stone towers known as nuraghi were constructed across the island. Even today, more than 7,000 examples survive, making Sardinia one of the most extraordinary prehistoric landscapes anywhere in Europe. Yet, despite their abundance, many of the civilization's greatest questions remain unanswered. Palmavera is among the finest surviving nuragic complexes because it preserves far more than a single tower. Archaeological excavations have revealed an entire village built around a central monumental structure. At its heart stands a massive stone tower, surrounded by secondary towers connected through fortified walls. Nearby lie dozens of circular huts, storage buildings, workshops, wells, and an impressive assembly area containing large stone benches arranged around an open meeting space. The complexity of the settlement immediately challenges outdated assumptions about prehistoric societies. Rather than scattered farming communities, the people of Palmavera organized labor on an impressive scale. Constructing the central towers required transporting and positioning enormous limestone blocks weighing several tons each. Without iron cranes, modern machinery, or advanced lifting equipment, they assembled structures that have remained standing for over 3,000 years. How they achieved this continues to inspire admiration. Archaeologists believe wooden rollers, earthen ramps, coordinated labor, and remarkable practical engineering allowed these massive stones to be positioned with extraordinary precision. Even so, many details of their construction methods remain uncertain because no written records survive explaining the process. The central nurag itself remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. What exactly was its primary function? Some researchers interpret these towers as defensive fortifications, capable of protecting surrounding communities during periods of conflict. Others emphasize their commanding visibility across the landscape, suggesting they served as symbols of political authority or regional leadership. Additional evidence points toward ceremonial functions, while some scholars argue that nuraghi combined military, administrative, religious, and residential purposes simultaneously. Palmavera supports several of these interpretations at once. Its towers certainly offered defensive advantages, yet the carefully planned assembly area suggests organized political gatherings. Excavated artifacts, including bronze tools, pottery, weapons, spindle whorls, jewelry, and imported objects, indicate that everyday domestic life unfolded alongside communal decision-making and long-distance trade. Trade, in fact, may have been one of the defining characteristics of the nuragic world. If Palmavera reminds us that entire civilizations can leave behind monumental architecture while withholding their own written voice, our journey now climbs into the volcanic highlands of North Macedonia, where another prehistoric site has inspired both careful scientific study and extraordinary speculation. Here, jagged rocks rise above the surrounding landscape like the remains of a shattered fortress, and among them lies Kokino, a place where the boundary between astronomy, ritual, and human imagination remains remarkably difficult to define. Long before sunrise, Kokino possesses an almost otherworldly atmosphere. Dark volcanic andesite formations crown the summit of the Tatichev Kamen Hill, their reddish surfaces glowing faintly beneath the first hints of morning light. The wind moves freely across the exposed ridges, carrying little more than the distant calls of birds and the rustle of dry mountain grasses. Standing here, nearly 1,000 meters above sea level, the modern world seems unusually distant. Endless valleys stretch toward the horizon, while scattered peaks fade into layers of blue-gray mist. At first glance, Kokino appears to be nothing more than an extraordinary natural rock formation. Towering pillars, narrow passages, fractured cliffs, and weathered stone platforms dominate the landscape. But as visitors begin to explore the summit, subtle signs of human activity emerge. Carefully carved seats overlook the eastern horizon. Narrow stone markers appear positioned with surprising precision. Grooves cut into the volcanic rock seem deliberate rather than accidental. Slowly, the mountain begins to reveal that it was shaped not only by geological forces, but also by human intention thousands of years ago. Archaeological investigations indicate that Kokino was used during the Bronze Age, primarily between the 19th and 12th centuries BC. Excavations have uncovered pottery, stone tools, molds used for casting bronze objects, fragments of ceramic vessels, grinding stones, and evidence of repeated human occupation. These discoveries demonstrate that the site served as far more than an isolated lookout point. Yet exactly what role it played remains one of southeastern Europe's most fascinating archaeological questions. One feature immediately captures attention. Several carefully positioned stone seats overlook the eastern sky. Nearby, narrow openings between rock formations frame specific points along the horizon where the sun appears during important moments of the year. These alignments led archaeologists to propose that Kokino functioned, at least in part, as a prehistoric observatory where seasonal solar movements could be monitored with remarkable accuracy. The idea attracted international attention. Researchers studying the site identified markers corresponding to sunrise positions during the summer solstice, winter solstice, and both equinoxes. Additional alignments may also relate to lunar cycles. For agricultural communities dependent upon seasonal change, such observations would have held enormous practical value, helping determine planting, harvesting, ceremonial calendars, and the passage of time itself. Unlike modern observatories filled with sophisticated instruments, Kokino required only stone, careful observation, and generations of accumulated knowledge. Its builders may have transformed the mountain into a calendar written across the horizon. Still, the interpretation remains more nuanced than early headlines sometimes suggested. While many archaeologists agree that astronomical observations likely formed part of Kokino's purpose, they caution against reducing the site to a single function. Ancient, sacred landscapes often combined practical astronomy with ritual activity, political authority, community gatherings, and symbolic meaning. Measuring the heavens may have been only one element within a much richer cultural landscape. The mountain itself seems perfectly suited for ceremony. Natural terraces overlook dramatic panoramas in every direction. Massive rock formations create secluded spaces that feel almost architectural, despite being shaped largely by volcanic processes. Certain stone seats appear elevated above surrounding areas, leading some researchers to suggest they may have been reserved for religious leaders, community elders, or individuals conducting important seasonal rituals. Excavations provide intriguing support for ceremonial activity. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of repeated offerings, including fragments of pottery deliberately deposited in particular locations. Bronze casting molds indicate that skilled metalworkers operated nearby, while traces of fire suggest ritual burning or communal gatherings may have taken place upon the summit. Yet, many details remain elusive. If Kokino reminds us that prehistoric people may have read the heavens with astonishing precision, our journey now descends from the mountain peaks to the quiet shores of the Black Sea. Here, another mystery unfolds, not in the movement of the stars, but in the slow transformation of the Earth itself. Once a thriving maritime gateway linking distant civilizations, Histria now stands several kilometers inland, separated from the sea that gave it life. The city remains, but the world around it quietly changed, leaving behind questions that still echo through its weathered stones. The first impression of Histria is one of unexpected silence. Low limestone walls stretch across an open plain bordered by reeds, shallow lagoons, and endless skies. Gentle winds sweep across the grasses, carrying the scent of salt water from the nearby Black Sea, though the coastline itself no longer touches the ancient city. In the distance, flocks of pelicans and herons glide over the wetlands of the Danube Delta, while broken columns and scattered marble blocks lie beneath the same sun that illuminated these streets more than 25 centuries ago. It is difficult to imagine that this peaceful landscape was once one of the busiest ports in the western Black Sea. Ships from Greece, Anatolia, the Balkans, and the northern steppes once sailed directly to Histria's harbor, bringing merchants, sailors, philosophers, soldiers, and explorers into constant contact with one another. Today, only silence remains where waves once reached the city's docks. Histria was founded around 657 BC by Greek colonists from Miletus, making it the earliest known Greek settlement on the western coast of the Black Sea. Positioned near the mouth of the Danube River, the city quickly developed into an important center for trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Grain, fish, wine, ceramics, metals, timber, and luxury goods flowed through its markets, connecting Mediterranean civilization with peoples living far beyond the familiar world of classical Greece. Its location made it exceptionally prosperous. Yet, that same location would eventually become one of its greatest mysteries. Unlike many ancient cities destroyed by invasion or warfare, Histria slowly lost the very coastline that had ensured its success. Over centuries, the Danube River carried immense quantities of sediment into the Black Sea, gradually reshaping the coastline. Sandbars expanded. Lagoons formed. The once open harbor slowly filled with silt until ships could no longer reach the city. Nature quietly accomplished what invading armies never could. The sea simply retreated. Archaeologists have reconstructed much of this environmental transformation through geological studies, sediment analysis, and ancient shoreline mapping. Yet, standing within the ruins today, the change remains astonishing. A city built for maritime commerce now overlooks wetlands instead of open water, reminding us that landscapes often evolve far more dramatically than human memory. Walking through Histria reveals layer upon layer of history. The earliest Greek settlement gradually expanded into a sophisticated urban center with paved streets, public squares, temples, defensive walls, workshops, markets, bathhouses, and residential neighborhoods. Centuries later, Roman influence transformed the city once again. New fortifications rose, monumental gates were constructed, and Christian basilicas eventually appeared among older pagan sanctuaries. Rather than replacing one civilization with another, Histria became a living record of continuous adaptation. Every generation modified what earlier inhabitants had left behind. One of the site's most remarkable features is its defensive system. Powerful stone walls, reinforced repeatedly throughout antiquity, protected the city against raids from neighboring tribes and later threats facing the Roman Empire. Excavations reveal multiple phases of construction, reflecting changing military technologies and political realities over several centuries. Yet, despite these impressive fortifications, Histria's greatest enemy remained invisible. Changing geography could not be resisted with walls. As the harbor became increasingly inaccessible, commercial activity gradually shifted elsewhere. Trade diminished. Population declined. Economic importance faded. Eventually, by the 7th century AD, the city was largely abandoned following centuries of environmental change combined with repeated invasions during the turbulent final stages of the ancient world. The disappearance of Histria therefore presents a different kind of mystery. It was not erased overnight. Instead, the city slowly lost the conditions necessary for survival, reminding us that civilizations often depend as much upon geography as upon politics or military power. Excavations conducted over more than a century have revealed extraordinary discoveries. Temples dedicated to Apollo, Zeus, Aphrodite, and other Greek deities once stood within the city. Inscriptions carved into stone preserve official decrees, religious dedications, commercial agreements, and personal names. Coins minted by Histria itself demonstrate the city's economic independence during its most prosperous centuries. Pottery imported from across the Mediterranean illustrates the remarkable extent of its commercial connections. Even so, much remains hidden. Only portions of the ancient settlement have been fully excavated, while significant areas remain buried beneath accumulated soil. Archaeologists continue uncovering houses, streets, workshops, and defensive structures that refine our understanding of how the city evolved across nearly 13 centuries of occupation. Religion adds another layer of fascination. As Greek beliefs gradually merged with Roman traditions before eventually giving way to Christianity, Histria became a remarkable example of religious continuity and transformation. Sacred spaces often remained important even as the beliefs practiced within them changed completely. Temples gave way to churches, yet the locations themselves continued attracting worshippers generation after generation. How did ordinary citizens understand these transitions? Did older beliefs quietly survive alongside newer ones? Archaeology offers intriguing hints, but few definitive answers. The surrounding landscape has inspired speculation as well. Some researchers have explored whether additional harbor installations now lie buried beneath sediments deposited by the Danube over thousands of years. Underwater archaeology and geological surveys suggest that parts of the ancient shoreline remain concealed beneath wetlands and offshore deposits, raising the possibility that entire sections of Histria's maritime infrastructure have yet to be rediscovered. This possibility continues to fuel archaeological investigation. Every improvement in remote sensing, sediment analysis, and underwater exploration increases the chance that hidden portions of the city may eventually emerge from beneath layers of mud accumulated over centuries. As often happens with places possessing long and mysterious histories, alternative theories have also appeared. Some independent writers suggest that Histria's planners intentionally selected its location according to celestial alignments linking important temples with seasonal sunrise positions. Others argue that undiscovered ceremonial districts may remain buried beyond the currently excavated boundaries. While such ideas remain speculative, the continuing expansion of archaeological knowledge means that future discoveries cannot be ruled out. Local folklore preserves its own quiet mysteries. Stories speak of submerged streets still resting beneath nearby lagoons, ancient bells occasionally heard beneath the water during calm evenings, and forgotten treasures hidden by merchants before the city's final decline. Fishermen have long described unusual stone formations beneath shallow waters, giving rise to tales that portions of old Histria still sleep beneath the changing coastline. These traditions belong to legend rather than documented history, yet they reflect the remarkable transformation that reshaped the landscape itself. Standing among the weathered ruins today, it becomes impossible to ignore the unusual relationship between the city and its vanished harbor. The buildings remain where they have always stood, yet the sea that sustained them has quietly moved away. Histria reminds us that even the greatest centers of trade and culture ultimately depend upon forces far beyond human control. Beneath the surrounding wetlands, within buried harbor sediments, and under streets that have yet to be excavated, countless pieces of its story almost certainly remain hidden. Whether those discoveries will finally explain every chapter of Histria's remarkable rise and quiet disappearance, or reveal entirely new mysteries waiting beneath the earth, is a question the shifting landscape continues to keep to itself.